Chapter 1682. As for Zhou Xian's matter, it was just a coincidence. This was equivalent to giving Yang Chendong an honorable reason. How could he not use it? Riding on the white dragon, Yang Chendong charged towards Guangzhou city under the protection of the 5,000 black cavalry. At the same time, the vanguard of the 2nd Division of the Lung Vanguard had arrived at the city gate tower and started setting up camp 8 miles away from the city. Hundreds of light and heavy machine guns had been set up on the trenches that had been temporarily dug. Although there were only 2,000 people, there was no fear on Gao Xiang's face. In his heart, he still hoped that the South Ming army would take the initiative to attack. In that case, he would be able to make the first contribution. What was disappointing was that the South Ming army in the Guangzhou prefecture didn't seem to have any intention of doing anything when they arrived. General Guan Ying stopped the other generals who wanted to go out to battle. Obviously, he didn't care about the 2,500-star army that had arrived first, because his plan was bigger. Over the years, the South Ming army had developed. For example, they had created many cannons. Due to the limitations of their technology, their cannons could only fire 3 miles away and they used solid bullets. However, when 200 cannons were set up on the city walls, it gave people a sense of security. Guan Ying already had a plan in his mind. This time he would wait for the enemy to charge over. He only needed to defend. That way his cannons could be used to attack. He wanted to take down the 5-star army's prestige on the city walls and use this battle to tell the world that the 5-star army was not invincible. Just last night, Guan Ying received the news that his teacher Kuang Yi had passed away. He also knew that because of the news of Xianxia's strength in the capital, the recruitment of soldiers was not effective. Many of the soldiers that were originally set up had disappeared. The 5 million soldiers that the South Ming had prepared were now only 1.5 million. They had lost 1 million soldiers. Guan Ying was naturally very sad about the death of his teacher. However, the battle was imminent and grief could not solve the problem. He had to think of a way to win this battle in order to better comfort his teacher's soul in heaven. At the same time, if they fought this battle well, it would strengthen the confidence of the Southern Ming dynasty and the people. Only then would they be able to recruit more soldiers and fight a long battle with the 5-star army. In the end, they would achieve the ultimate goal of not invading the Southern Ming dynasty. On this point, Guan Ying clearly knew his own limits. He knew that it was impossible for the South Ming Empire to defeat Xianxia. Disregarding everything else, the other party had taken over so much territory and stationed troops everywhere. Once all of them were called back, just the number alone was enough to scare people to death. Therefore he only asked for a draw. In the end, the Southern Ming Empire would recognize Bugnam of Gozhouzian as a legitimate country, and the Southern Ming Empire would be able to govern itself. However, this goal was not so easy to achieve. To be safe, Guan Ying chose to defend. He wanted to use the city walls to block the 5-star army. Commander Gao Xiang waited until the next morning. After seeing that the Southern Ming Empire had no intention of attacking, he knew that the other party would not take the initiative to attack. Immediately, he reported what had happened and his analysis to the division headquarters using an electric suit. Not long after, Yang Chendong also received the news. Young master, this Guan Ying has grown up. He can keep his composure. However, he thinks that he can stop our army with 450,000 soldiers. That's a bit of a fantasy. Beta Persei, who was accompanying him, also saw this telegram. He immediately looked down on Guan Ying and laughed. Yang Lu had been killed. A white silk had ended his life. It could be considered a dignified death. At that time, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Yang San, Yang Si and Yang Wu were all present. They could be considered brothers and they came to send him off. Although Yang Lu was dead, the impact of the incident had already happened. Other than Tiger's Mane, the other servants could not help but worry about their future. After all, such a thing had happened. If the young master was no longer close to them, it would be reasonable. Fortunately, Yang Chendong was only concerned about the incident and not the person. Yang Lu was dead, so in his eyes the matter was considered over. This time he still brought Beta Persei with him. As soon as this signal was sent, it completely calmed the hearts of the servants. It also let the other officials of Xianxia know that the servants were still servants. They were still trusted by Bugnam of Gozhouzian. Some people who originally wanted to replace Yang Lu also gave up on this idea. The situation in Xianxia became stable again. Okay, Beta Persei, go and call Yu Mian over. Yang Chendong also smiled. Beta Persei's words on this matter were very much in line with his thoughts. In modern warfare, whoever had more people would not necessarily win, and whoever defended would have more advantages. The power and advanced weapons would ultimately determine the route of victory and defeat. Just like in the original historical spacetime on the battlefield of Normandy, a German machine gunner killed more than 1,000 Allied soldiers with a machine gun. This was enough proof. Of course, not all armies applied this model. For example, the soldiers of the People's Liberation Army in the future defeated their opponents one by one with a rifle. But this theory was still applicable to most of the enemies of the army. After a while, Yumian came in front of Yang Qindong. Speaking of which, the two had not seen each other for a long time. The last time they met, they even made a bet. It turned out that Yang Qindong won again. Today, the far eastern province had long become one of Xianxia's important granaries. There was a large area of fertile land, rich in forest resources and various minerals. It could be said that except for the cold climate, it was already perfect. Especially after the construction of the train tracks. In spring, summer and autumn, the people chose to work. In winter, they left their homes to travel or relax in the three eastern provinces. It was a beautiful life. It was equivalent to Yumian losing to Yang Qindong. This time no one brought up the matter of the bet. They called Yumian to talk about the reconstruction of the southern Ming dynasty and persuading them to surrender. Yumian, with our powerful military strength, it won't take long for us to win on the battlefield. Persuading the officials of the southern Ming dynasty to surrender and the reconstruction work after the war will be handed over to you. How is it? Do you have any difficulties? Yumian was already in his 40s and was in the prime of his life. When he heard Yang Qindong's question, he immediately straightened his posture and said, replying to the sixth young master, I promise to complete the task. Yumian had this confidence because this time, there were 5,000 cadres from Rijing City accompanying him. These people were all cultured and experienced management talents. There were also 5,000 cadres from other Xianxia provinces. They had considerable experience in migration, land distribution, and city reconstruction. Adding on the fact that Rijing City had prepared enough food and necessities, Yumian was confident that he could complete this task. It had to be said that Yang Qindong's migration policy was really good. Because of the migration, the barriers between the different races were disrupted, and the opposing voices could not work together. Every time they went to a new place, they would face a group of unfamiliar people and even unfamiliar races. No matter how capable and ambitious they were in this kind of environment, they could only lower their heads and accept their fate. Not to mention the Xianxia did not disregard the people after the migration. They distributed land, houses, seeds, food and necessities and so on. They hoped that the people after the migration would have food to eat and houses to live in. Like this, who would think of rebelling? To most of the people they did not ask for much. As long as they had a place to settle down, they would be satisfied. As for the rise and fall of a race, that was something that only a few ambitious people would think about. It was not something that the common people should think about. It was because of this migration policy that there were very few rebellions in Xianxia's territory. Almost every piece of land that they occupied, other than having to pay a hefty price in the beginning to provide money, after a few years, this place would begin to exert its power and provide food and money to the Yang faction. This also helped the Yang faction to grow stronger and stronger. Of course, the prerequisite for this was that most of the people were uncultured. If it was the future where everyone was familiar with the history of their race, it would be difficult to carry out such a large-scale migration, and there would be endless problems. It was also because of this that the Xianxia started to popularize culture in their territory. The difference was that everyone, regardless of race, had to learn the Han culture, write Chinese and speak the Han language. This was tantamount to a cultural assimilation. Like this, many years later, everyone would only know about the Han culture, and would not know that there were so many different languages in the world. The more Yumian thought about this, the more he admired Yang Qindong. In fact, it was not just him. In the entire Xianxia, most of the Han officials admired Yang Qindong, and this admiration turned into respect. Yang Qindong did not feel much about this. He only knew that since he had come to this world and had brought Ditsong with him, he had to do something. It was just that the results were out of his expectations, but this kind of result was even better and he was even happier. After Yumian did not have any more questions, he quickly bid farewell and left. Yang Qindong rode the white dragon, and the black cavalry went straight to the Guangzhou prefecture. April 1468 AD. Under the Guangzhou prefecture city, more than 100,000 five-star army were stationed here. The bright five-star flag fluttered in the wind, and from afar, it was a world of red flags. As more and more five-star army soldiers gathered, the South Ming army on the city gate tower continuously moved boulders, wooden sleepers, kerosene bows and other things to the top of the city gate tower, as if they were going to defend to the death. With these resources, they were confident that the five-star army wouldn't be able to return and would suffer heavy losses. Guan Ying even found Commander Li Hani, and proposed that if the five-star army failed to attack the city, they would send out an army to counterattack. All the war horses in the city were also mobilized, forming a total of 5,000 cavalrymen. When the time was right, they would counterattack with all their might and obtain the final victory of the Guangzhou prefecture city. Chapter 1683. With a large pile of defensive equipment, sufficient soldiers, and enough provisions to last for a year, Guan Ying had a calm and steady look on his face. He wanted to see what the five-star army, who had always been known to be invincible, would do at this moment. It was said that one's thoughts determined one's vision. Guan Ying's scope was still too small. At most he had a place in the southern Ming dynasty. Compared to Xianxia, who had already conquered all of Asia and even had a navy that was advancing towards Europe and the Western countries, it was not an exaggeration to say that Guan Ying was like a firefly compared to the bright moon. Just as Guan Ying was thinking about how to defend, the five-star army's cannons were ready to assemble at the Guangzhou government. This time the five-star army was using the newly developed 120mm field cannon. Compared to the 90mm field cannon, which had a range of 10 miles, and the 75mm field cannon, which had a range of 6 miles, it could shoot up to 15 miles. The larger the caliber, the greater the lethality. Everything was difficult at the beginning. Once the beginning was made, the next step would be much easier. The lathes were constantly being updated. In addition, there were many new cannons in the warehouse for people to imitate and research. Currently, the progress of the cannons in the Crimson City was increasing rapidly. It was worth mentioning that the new weapons were mainly used on the Navy's ships for the conquest of the West. The new weapons allowed Xianxia's military committee member and deputy commander of the Navy, Zhou Xian, to fight against the foreign races with greater ease. After a few months, they had already conquered the Cape of Good Hope and landed in Africa's Niger River. It was foreseeable that news of their victory would arrive soon. Yang Qindong had also thought of boarding a large ship and killing his way to the west. However, no one agreed to this suggestion. The sea was different from the land. Danger could come at any time. Something happened to Yang Qindong, no one would be able to take responsibility. Helpless, Yang Qindong could only give up on this idea. The 2nd Division of the Cold Front Division's cannons were pulled 5 miles away from the Guangzhou government. This distance was out of the range of the southern Ming's redcoat cannons. Accompanying the division commander, Xiao Feng, to inspect the cannons was a young man. Crown Prince Chong, please be careful. When he saw that the young man was actually carrying the ammunition box with the artillery soldiers, Commander Xiao Feng, who had never frowned in the face of so many enemies on the battlefield, broke out in cold sweat. The young man was Yang Bo. This time he had taken the initiative to come to the battlefield. Yang Qindong also agreed. If he wanted to inherit his great cause, he had to learn this lesson on the battlefield. Only by doing so would he know that victory was not easy to come by. Only by doing so would he be able to intimidate Xia's 3 armies and the millions of soldiers that he would have in the future. In order to train Yang Bo, other than returning to Yang Qindong's side at night to report what he had seen and heard, he was allowed to roam freely in the army to observe what he was interested in. Under safe circumstances, no one was allowed to stop him. As a matter of fact, when Yang Bo heard that the artillery soldiers were about to attack, he took the initiative to come. This frightened Xiao Feng. He knew that this person was very precious. Not to mention that his life was in danger. Even if his skin was scratched, he would not be able to bear the consequences. Helplessly, he could only accompany him. This caused the artillery regiment's commander, Lin Luan, to be very careful as he led a group of artillery regiment's officers to protect him. Alright, Division Commander Xiao, Regiment Commander Lin, go do what you are supposed to do. I am here to learn and experience, not to be protected. Yang Bo, who was already 12 years old, saw that there was nothing he could do with so many people surrounding him. He could not help but put down what he was doing and turn to look at Yang Bo and the others. Crown Prince Chong, but Xiao Feng and the others wanted to say something, but Yang Bo's face darkened. Follow my orders. This is a military order. You cannot disobey it. Needless to say, Yang Bo, who was wearing a custom-made military uniform that was a few sizes smaller, was quite impressive when he was angry. At the very least, he managed to intimidate Xiao Feng and the others. They had to obey military orders. After saluting in unison, they went back to doing what they were supposed to do. Ba Daojiang and Ping Yu led 200 black cavalry soldiers to watch from the side. Their faces were filled with gratification. The Crown Prince Chang's aura was getting stronger and stronger. It would not be long before he had the ability to inherit the 6th young master's legacy. This was just a small interlude. The cold vanguard soldiers were busy. Guan Ying received the news from the top of the Guangzhou Prefecture's city gate tower and was looking around. They had something similar to binoculars in their hands, but the quality was not as good as the 5-star armies. They could only see further. They are deploying the artillery. They are about 5 miles away from us. Our artillery cannot reach that far. Guan Ying put down his binoculars and frowned as he spoke. He knew the power of the artillery and knew that it was the 5-star army's forte. They were no match for them in this aspect. However, it did not matter. The main point of attacking a city was to take down the city. It was not a competition of whose artillery was more powerful. Your artillery could not possibly charge up the city gate tower like a human. In the end, they still had to rely on humans to climb up the city gate. Not to mention, Guan Ying had already arranged enough troops in the streets of the city. This was the embryonic form of urban warfare. There were quite a lot of people in the prefecture of Guangzhou at the moment. There were more than 450,000 soldiers. In addition to the civilians who rushed over from various prefectures, there were more than 1 million people. This was because there were many commoners who had left the southern Ming Empire for Xichen City. Otherwise, the number of commoners alone would have exceeded 2 million. Remember, when the enemy's artillery fire, you must find a place to hide. Do not run around. That will only increase the danger. Also, we don't need to arrange too many soldiers on the city gate tower for the time being. When the enemy's cannons have finished firing, the soldiers will rush up the city gate tower and give the 5-star army a fatal blow. As Guan Ying spoke, someone beside him was recording. After a while, these words would be transmitted to the ears of the various generals. Just from these arrangements, one could see that Guan Ying was indeed capable. At the very least, he knew how to avoid the spearhead. However, it was a pity that he had too little understanding of the power of the artillery. In other words, he had underestimated the power of the 5-star army's artillery. This meant that he was destined to lose in the end. The artillery regiment was deployed. The artillery regiment was divided into 3 groups. They were respectively guarding the north, west, and south gates of the Guangzhou prefecture. Only the east gate was left. This was what the art of war referred to as Surround 3 and Block 1. If the enemy was left with a chance of survival, they would not risk their lives to fight back. Outside the east gate, the 3rd Corps and the 1st Division had already prepared an ambush. They were just waiting for the South Ming army to escape from here. Then they would deal with them once and for all. After the artillery was set up, the ammunition was also transported. The sky was already dark. Yang Qindong decided to launch the artillery attack early in the morning. As such, the soldiers fell asleep early in the morning. Yang Bo, on the other hand, could not fall asleep. After thinking about it in bed, he went to Yang Qindong's main tent. Yang Qindong did not sleep. With his current body, he only needed to meditate for 2 hours when he was tired and let the qi in his body circulate through his body several times. After that, he would be full of energy again. He had already passed this set of techniques to Yang Qindong. Perhaps it was because of his physique that he had transmigrated to Yang Qindong could cultivate qi and control it well. However, Yang Bo was still unable to do so. He still needed more time to practice. Yang Qindong, who had not slept, was looking at the telegrams sent from various departments. He would ponder from time to time. When he thought of something, he would write down some instructions. When Beta Persei said that Crown Prince Chong wanted to see him, he stopped writing and sat up straight. Yang Bo entered the tent and bowed respectfully. Then he called out, "Father." "Bo, it's already so late. Why aren't you sleeping? Are you too excited?" Yang Qindong waved his hand and called Yang Bo to sit beside him. Father Bo is not excited. I just don't understand some things, Yang Bo said with an expression of asking for advice. What is it that you don't understand? Tell me about it. Yang Qindong had a fatherly smile on his face. He liked Yang Bo's attitude of asking for advice. There was nothing shameful about asking if he did not understand. On the contrary, pretending to know when he did not know would ruin things. Yes. Yang Bo took the initiative to stand up and asked with an expression of learning, Father, you once said that your greatest wish was to bring the Han people to the peak of the world, to bring harmony to the world and to let the Han people live the best lives. However, if we were to bombard like this, wouldn't the Guangzhou prefecture be destroyed? Wouldn't the Han people in the city be killed as well? Wouldn't that be? What would that be? Yang Bo did not say, but he believed that his father would understand his question. Very good. Bo's thoughts of pitying the people are good. However, it is impossible for there to be no deaths in a war. Most importantly, if we are able to eliminate the 450,000 soldiers of the Southern Ming Empire, it will play a positive role in our conquest of the Southern Ming Empire. Using this battle to determine victory and defeat will reduce the difficulty of our conquest. This is very worthwhile. Furthermore, be it the soldiers or the people in the city, they are not innocent. The soldiers were ordered to fight. If we don't kill them, they will kill us. As for the people, when we gave them the chance to leave from the various ports and head to Xianxia city, many of them left obediently. However, there are still some who stayed behind. Do you know why? This. Yang Bo pondered for a moment before saying, I'm afraid that the people who stayed behind do not trust us. They still have fantasies about the Southern Ming Empire. Very good, Bo is right. Since they do not trust us and they have made their own choice, they are our enemies. We cannot show mercy to our enemies, so it is not wrong to bombard them. Of course, they are Han people after all. If they did not help the Southern Ming Empire and chose to abandon the city and escape, Father will do his best to be merciful and not take their lives. However, if they did something wrong, they will be punished. All of their assets will be confiscated and they will be put through labor for 1 to 3 years. After they are released, they will still be Han people and can enjoy the fruits of our labor. This is a reward and punishment. Chapter 1684. Such a detailed explanation made Yang Bo nod his head continuously. He finally understood his father's painstaking efforts. At this moment, the haze on Yang Bo's face disappeared. Instead, he bowed deeply. Father Bo will remember your words. Good. Yang Qindong patted Yang Bo's shoulder with a gratified expression. In fact, as Yang Qindong thought, the commoners who accompanied the South Ming army in the Guangzhou prefecture did indeed treat the 5-star army as an opponent. This was not as simple as distrust. Among the commoners there were mainly tyrants. They had already received news that wherever the 5-star army went, the rich would only be able to leave behind 20% of their wealth. This was something they could not accept. Although most of their wealth came from the Great Ming dynasty's good policies and exploitation, this was also a kind of ability, wasn't it? Why should the wealth that they worked so hard to obtain be handed over to the Xianxia? They could not understand, so they wanted to be enemies with the 5-star army. In order to let the South Ming army win the war, these tyrants even took out money and food to provide for the South Ming army. With such people, even if they died under artillery fire, Yang Qindong would not feel the slightest bit of heartache. Other than these tyrants, there were also some elderly people. They did not want to leave their homes. Even if they died, they wanted to die in their homeland. Of course, the proportion of such people was very small. There was also a group of scholars from the Great Ming dynasty. They had learned the ways of Confucius and Mencius from a young age and were very knowledgeable. Under the Great Ming dynasty's system, bookworms like them had a very high chance of becoming government officials. However, once they were transferred to the Yang faction, they would no longer have any prospects for development. And so these people stayed behind. But even if they stayed behind when they saw the South Ming army practicing formations in the barracks before the war started, they still looked down on them and said, they are really all brawn and no brains. Their actions are a disgrace to the educated. He was about to die, surrounded and unable to go anywhere, yet he still looked down on martial artists and soldiers. Even if such a person entered the Xianxia, he would still be reformed. Even if some of these people died, no one would feel sorry for them. In short, the people who stayed behind were all enemies of the Yang faction. Even if they were enemies, How could they be innocent under the fire of the cannons? The night passed uneventfully, and the sun rose as usual the next morning. The soldiers of the 5-star army had a hot breakfast early in the morning. When it was 7 o'clock, the artillery soldiers were in position and the shells were loaded. Commander Lin Luan, who had the rank of senior colonel, Leng Feng's officers were all high-ranking officers, raised a small red flag and shouted loudly in front of everyone, "Target, Guangzhou Prefecture City Wall. Distance, 5 miles. Direction, to the left 004. Pursuit. Reload. Delay fuse. Everyone get ready." As the red flag suddenly fell, Lin Luan shouted again, "Fire." Boom. Cannonballs shot out of the barrel and headed straight for the prefecture of Guangzhou. After the cannons were fired from the west gate, the cannons were fired from the north gate and south gate as well. For a moment the sound of cannons rumbled, causing the earth to tremble. The Guangzhou prefecture's city walls, which were marked as the attacking side, were instantly riddled with holes. As the cannonballs landed one after another, pieces of the walls fell off, and waves of cries and screams rang out. It was clear that under the bombardment many southern Ming soldiers were hit, and the screams came from the mouths of these soldiers. The southern Ming soldiers couldn't even raise their heads after being hit by the blazing flames one after another. These country bumpkins finally saw the power of the Xianxia cannons. It was definitely not something their red coat cannons could compare to. The 200 red coat cannons that were set up in the surroundings were now in a miserable state. Under the barrage of cannon fire, it was smashed into a pile of scrap metal. It was impossible for it to display its strength. Hearing that the cannons were all destroyed, Guan Ying's face showed a look of heartache. However, the southern Ming generals beside him did not notice this. Instead, they kept flattering him. "Thanks to the general's great foresight, we had the soldiers withdraw from the city tower in advance. Otherwise, the losses this time would be too great. Yes, I really did not expect the 5-star army's cannons to be so powerful. Of course, they did not expect that we had already made arrangements under the general's orders. This time these cannons are destined to return empty-handed. When they are done, it will be time for us to show our power." The generals were all talking at once, one after another. Those who did not know would think that they were already the victors. After half an hour of artillery fire, the explosions finally became weaker and weaker until they completely disappeared. Guan Ying's expression returned to normal. Although the red coat cannons that he had arranged were destined to not be of much use, it was still a great contribution to preserve the main force of the army. Now it was up to their own skills. "Come, send everyone up to the city tower. The cannons have stopped firing. The 5-star army should be preparing to attack." For a moment the sound of soldiers shouting could be heard everywhere. The southern Ming soldiers who had been hiding also began to rush up the city tower. However, when they really reached the city tower, they realized that there were no enemies in front of them. There was also no sign of the 5-star army. What's going on? Why didn't they charge? Many of the generals on the city tower were puzzled. Guan Yin also did not immediately understand. He stood there and was vexed. Suddenly he thought of a possibility. He immediately shouted, "Not good, the 5-star army is going to continue firing. Quickly, everyone retreat." After shouting, Guan Yin ignored the others and was the first to go down the city tower. At this moment the cannons sounded again. The 5-star army's cannons had covered the city for the second time. As a person from the future, Yang Qindong was naturally more familiar with the use of cannons than other people. For example, the second cannons had already been used during the anti-Japanese war. This method would often cause the enemy to be unable to grasp the situation and would often cause them to pay a heavy price. Previously, Yang Qindong did not know that Guan Yin had withdrawn the army in advance. The second cannons that he ordered were just a habit. It was this habit that caught the southern Ming army off guard and caused them to suffer heavy losses. Many of the southern Ming army still did not know what was going on. While they were still crowded on the city tower, the cannons rumbled and landed on the city wall. One by one the southern Ming army was blown away, killed or injured. Just the second round of cannon fire had affected at least 4,000 southern Ming soldiers. When the cannons stopped, the city tower was filled with broken limbs. Occasionally there were people who were lucky enough to survive. However, they were also injured and crying in pain. At this time there were no effective anti-inflammatory drugs. Once the injuries were too serious, they were basically waiting for death. Less than 4 hours after the battle started, there were already more than 1,000 injured people. Moreover, these people might not be able to be treated. Guan Ying's expression became even uglier. He was not afraid of the 5-star army attacking the city. With his preparations in advance as well as the sufficient troops and food in the city, he was confident that he could fight a big battle with the 5-star army. Even if he could not win, he would be able to remain undefeated for a certain period of time. However, the feeling of not being able to see anyone and being hit by long-range cannons was really not good. It gave people a feeling that they could not use their strength. The cannons stopped for the second time. This time the 5-star army moved. However, they only sent out a few people. Each of them held a metal loudspeaker and came to a place 1 arrow away from the city tower. They shouted loudly, "Southern Ming Army, listen up. The 5-star army is willing to accept the injured Southern Ming soldiers because we are all Han people. You just need to use a crane to lower them down from the city tower. Then our army will take them away for treatment to save their lives. There is no need to thank us. If you want to thank someone, thank your parents for giving birth to you in the land of Han people. Southern Ming Army, listen up. The 5-star army is..." The shouts came again and again. Several people took turns to shout. There were people below the city gates. This way they could ensure that the Southern Ming soldiers in the city could hear them clearly. After another half an hour, the people who had shouted finally turned around and left. Seeing the 5-star army leave, a few generals looked at Guan Ying worriedly and asked, "General, what should we do? How was this treating a patient?" This was clearly a psychological tactic. This was to buy people's hearts and also to mess up their morale. How could Guan Ying not know what was going on? However, the other party did not attack the city. What could he do? Thinking that he could not mess up before attacking the city, Guan Ying gritted his teeth and said, "Find the best doctors in the city and let them treat the injured. This will calm the soldiers down." This was clearly going against the 5-star army. He was also telling the soldiers that the 5-star army could save them. The Southern Ming Imperial Court could also save them. They just needed to work hard. As expected, this move was effective. When the other Southern Ming soldiers saw the injured being carried into various hospitals and the doctors running over to treat them, they were very happy. This also indirectly proved that if they were injured, they would not be abandoned. This meant that they had a higher chance of survival. After breaking the psychological breakdown of the 5-star army, before they could take a breather, the sound of cannons rang out again. However, this time the cannons did not land on the city tower. Instead, they fired towards the Guangzhou prefecture. For a moment, the sound of cannons could be heard everywhere in the city. Because some places were made of wood, they were directly set on fire. The cannons directly extended into the city and caught the Southern Ming army off guard. Without enough preparation, they suffered heavy losses. Chapter 1685. This was because the cannonballs did not hit any of the stored supplies. For example, flammable items such as kerosene. Otherwise, who knew what would happen? After another half an hour, the sound of cannonballs stopped. Then some people holding metal horns came and began to shout at the foot of the city. In order to stabilize the morale of the army, Guan Ying had no choice but to send the wounded to the hospital for treatment. However, there was news from the hospital that they had already treated 3,000 to 4,000 patients in half a morning. They had already reached their limit. If there were more patients, they would not be able to treat them. This answer made Guan Ying's face instantly turn black. Didn't this mean that if the 5-star army continued to bombard the city, the morale of his army would be shaken? Just as Guan Ying was thinking about what to do, the 5-star army retreated. In exchange, there was another rumbling sound of cannonballs. The Southern Ming army suffered heavy losses again. Thousands of people were killed and thousands of people were injured. Finally, it was noon. The 5-star army's bombardment stopped. Looking from afar, smoke rose in spirals. It was obvious that they were eating lunch. In contrast, although the Southern Ming army in the city had prepared their meals, there were not many people who had an appetite. Especially when they saw many soldiers and civilians lying on the streets and wailing. When they saw that there was no doctor to take care of them, some of the soldiers' faces began to change. It was as if they could see their future. The morale of the army began to waver. "Bastard, the 5-star army is not a real hero. They don't dare to fight us with real swords and spears." Guan Ying roared in anger. This caused the other generals to lower their heads. At this time no one was willing to speak. Seeing that no one was speaking, Guan Ying became even angrier. Fine, since they don't want to come, then we will go out. Generally, this time it's up to you. Don't worry, after the cavalry rushes out, I will immediately send the infantry to protect your flanks. This time we will catch the 5-star army unprepared. Good. Li Hani nodded heavily. This feeling of being beaten without being able to hit anyone was really unpleasant. He also thought that it was time to fight back. Guan Ying did not expect that the trump card he had prepared would be used so soon. But at this moment he really couldn't think of a better way. The southern Ming dynasty's 5,000 cavalry began to make their preparations. However, it was not entirely accurate to say that there were 5,000 cavalrymen. After the 3 rounds of cannon fire in the morning, the cavalrymen also suffered some losses. About 100 of them were injured by the cannonballs. However, for a team of 5,000 people, losing 100 or so people was not a big deal. Li Hani was clad in armor and held a long spear in his hand. He looked very majestic. The cavalry behind him also had all kinds of weapons. For example, long sabers, spears, halberds, axes, and so on. Just from this point alone, this cavalry wasn't very proper. This was because everyone knew that if cavalry wanted to develop their advantages, they had to be flexible, quick, and take advantage of the situation. A sharp, light, and nimble saber was the best weapon. In comparison, the longer a weapon was, the more restrictions it would face. However, at this point no one cared about that. They only wanted to charge out and catch the 5-star army off guard to take revenge for the cannon fire in the morning. It would be best if they could force the 5-star army back on the right track and let them attack the city. Afterwards both sides would fight back and forth. That would be perfect. Under the command of Li Hani, the 5,000 cavalrymen made their preparations. The drawbridge at the west gate of the Guangzhou prefecture was also quickly raised. Following which, the earth began to shake and the cavalry began to charge. The city gate suddenly opened and countless cavalrymen rushed out. When this formation appeared, Yang Qindong, who was standing beside him, couldn't help but tense up. This was the first time he had experienced this kind of situation. It was impossible to say that he wasn't nervous. However, when he looked at his father and the other generals, he noticed that there was almost no change in their expressions. Although the battle was approaching, they were not nervous in the slightest. Generally, people who had experienced hundreds of battles would be calm the closer they were to the battle. They would be able to talk and laugh. After fighting so many battles, they would get used to it. On the other hand, Yang Qindong was already prepared for the possible reaction of the South Ming army. Did they really think that the trenches in front of the city gate were dug for nothing? Did they really think that the cold front soldiers in the trenches were just decorations? In front of the west gate, the cold front soldiers who were chatting in the trenches heard the sound of horse hooves. 1st Regiment Commander Gao Xiang quickly extinguished the cigarette in his hand and raised his head to look outside. This time he didn't even need to use binoculars to see clearly. Ah, they are finally here. They are coming from our 1st Regiment's defensive line. It seems that our luck is not bad. Brothers, immediately enter the formation and prepare to fire. Laughing loudly, Gao Xiang arrived in front of a heavy machine gun. He made preparations while shouting loudly. The trenches were 4 miles away from the city gate. A distance of 2,000 meters could be said to be covered in the blink of an eye. However, even though they were fast, there were still bullets faster than them. Seeing that the enemy had exited the city gate and was less than 2 miles away from them, Commander Gao Xiang started counting down silently in his heart. 5, 4, 3, 2. Fire. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. The first to sound was the heavy machine gun in his hand. Following that, gunshots continued to sound, accompanied by the sound of rocket launchers exploding from time to time, greatly suppressing the charging formation of the cavalry. Under the barrage of gunfire and cannon fire, the southern Ming cavalry that charged forward were cut down like chives, falling to the ground one after another. In order to display their advantage, Li Hani even formed a charging formation and gathered the cavalry together. This originally allowed them to be like a knife that stabbed into the enemy's camp. However, when faced with the powerful firearms of the 5-star army, this method was equivalent to helping the flintlock soldiers and was equivalent to gathering together to become live targets. As the saying goes, the faster you charge, the faster you die. The closer you charge, the faster you die. When batches of cavalrymen were hit by the spears and fell to the ground, they were trampled by the cavalrymen behind them and turned into a pile of meat paste. The momentum of the southern Ming army's cavalry began to slow down. Under the blockade of hundreds of light and heavy machine guns, less than 5,000 cavalry could not get close at all. Needless to say, rocket launchers, grenades, and other weapons were fired continuously as if they were free of charge. Retreat, retreat quickly. After nearly half of the cavalry died in a short period of time, Li Hani's face became very distressed. He could not bear such losses and finally made the decision to retreat. As soon as his voice fell, the cavalry turned their horses back. However, if they wanted to go back now, how could they do it without paying a price? The gunshots continued and the cavalry continued to fall from their horses. About 1,000 cavalry died in battle, and the remaining South Ming cavalry hurriedly fled into the city. After entering the city, Li Hani's tears fell. There were 5,000 cavalry just now, but in just a short while there were less than 2,000 cavalry left. They did not even touch a hair of the enemy. This battle was really useless. Guan Ying had already arrived at the city tower, but he did not have any intention of blaming Li Hani. If he was the one leading the troops just now, he would have ordered the army to retreat. After all, the number of cavalry was too small. If there were 100,000 cavalry, he might have taken the risk. General. After seeing Guan Ying, the tears on Li Hani's face had yet to dry. "Sai, go and rest first. We will think of other ways." Guan Ying comforted him. Before he could think of another solution, another round of bombardment began. The city was once again in a mess. Countless soldiers and civilians were killed or injured. In the afternoon there were 3 rounds of cannon fire, 3 rounds of shouting, and finally it was night time. It seemed that they could have a good rest. After a tiring day, Guan Ying, who was mentally exhausted, was also preparing to go to bed and rest. However, at this moment the cannons sounded once again. Amidst the booming sounds, the Guangzhou prefecture became lively once again. "Not good, the 5-star army is approaching the southern gate. Quickly go up the city tower." Amidst the chaos, a shout suddenly sounded. This made Guan Ying, who had just left his room, look serious. Then he led his guards and rushed up the southern gate tower. When Guan Ying went up the city tower, the 5-star army had already retreated. The facts proved that the other party had only sent out a small number of troops. When they saw that the situation was hopeless, they retreated. However, it reminded Guan Ying that the 5-star army would not only bombard the city but also steal the city. Pass down the order. Order the generals to take turns to guard the city. We must not let the other party succeed in stealing the city. Guan Ying rubbed his temples and said with a tired face. In the 5-star army's barracks outside the Guangzhou prefecture, Yang Bo still had an excited look on his face. The battle during the day, especially the scene of the southern Ming cavalry being killed, had really stimulated him. As the sky was already dark, he was still unable to sleep. Thus, he simply went to his father's tent and asked about things that interested him. "Father, did we not succeed in stealing the barracks? Why didn't we send more troops and use cannon fire to cover it?" Stealing the barracks is fake. There is no need for us to do such a risky thing. By doing so, we are reminding the other party that we are strong and that they will be on guard. After a while they will have no choice but to deal with us. This will make them even more tired. Not only will they be physically tired, but they will also be mentally tired. This will play a very positive role in accelerating their collapse. So that's how it is. Yang Bo nodded as if he understood. You must remember that the lives of soldiers are the most important. If you don't have to put your life on the line, do your best to use other methods. This is especially true for the Han people. War is a kind of knowledge and there are too many ways to do it. We need to constantly learn. Yang Qindong said earnestly. He was very optimistic about his successor and had great expectations for him. Chapter 1686. Yang Bo nodded heavily. On this day he truly witnessed the cruelty of the battlefield. Although he could not enter the city and could not see the tragic scene in the Guangzhou prefecture, he could still imagine it. Just like what his father Xinri said, since these people chose to be enemies with Xianxia, then regardless of whether they were soldiers or civilians, they were all enemies. Xianxia could not be soft-hearted towards his enemies. Since Xianxia had powerful cannons, why not use them? To be able to obtain victory and reduce the number of casualties, this was definitely the best choice. On this night, Yang Qindong asked a lot of questions and Yang Qindong explained a lot. This suitable successor was on his way to becoming an outstanding successor. On the same night, the Guangzhou prefecture was filled with wailing sounds. Compared to before, everyone's mood was obviously much lower now. Especially the wounded soldiers who had already been abandoned. Since there were not enough doctors, they were gathered together. Their only treatment was that someone would make porridge for them. As for whether their injuries would become inflamed and whether they could survive, it would depend on their fate. When they were surrounded by a group of poor people, a group of injured people, this kind of sadness would be infinitely magnified. It was unknown who it was that suddenly shouted, "Since the 5-star army is willing to accept us and is willing to provide us with treatment conditions, then why don't you let us go? Yes, we are already useless. We can only wait for death if we stay here. You should let us go." As soon as the voice fell, it was immediately echoed by other people. "Let us go, we want to live. We just don't want to die, sob sob sob." Shouts, cries, curses and pleas rose and fell one after another. Soon it filled the entire area. When the shouts spread out, the soldiers who were walking outside were shocked. More people also felt sympathy for them. It was as if they could see themselves tomorrow. These South Ming soldiers thought that the wounded soldiers should be sent out of the city. Everyone had the right to live, right? Due to the lack of information, the South Ming army here did not know that the 5-star army had used the same method to deal with Baiming's hundreds of thousands of troops and finally defeated them. However, as their commander, Guan Ying knew about this matter. He could even imagine that once he agreed, there would be more injured soldiers appearing in the city for no reason. As for where those scars came from, it was likely that it was man-made and it was just a way to survive. Thinking of the possible outcome, Guan Ying naturally wouldn't agree to send the wounded out to the 5-star army. "Men, bring my bodyguards to the sick area and warn those people. If they dare to talk nonsense again, they will be punished according to military law. At the same time, tell them that the doctor will be here soon. Tell them to be patient. Also, immediately send people out of the city to ask for help from the capital. Tell them that we need reinforcements and doctors." Guan Ying couldn't guarantee that the request for help would be effective, but he still had to do what he should do. Otherwise, if the morale of the troops was broken, it would be difficult to lead them. Immediately, a messenger left the Guangzhou government. They chose to leave from the East Gate because it seemed that there weren't any 5-star army stationed there. However, what made people happy was that this messenger openly jumped over the 5-star army's defense line. It was obvious that the 5-star army wasn't afraid of them asking for help. "Good news, General, our messenger safely left." Guangdong's chief of the left, Zhou Xian, received the news and excitedly ran over to tell Guan Ying. Guan Ying was calm, but he had a bad feeling in his heart. It seemed that the 5-star army didn't care about his actions at all. They clearly wanted to eat him up. Since that was the case, then he had to persevere and see if there was still a chance to counterattack. Perhaps the other 2 provinces would defeat the 5-star army and come to help him. As long as there were reinforcements, they would be able to kill their way out and surround the 5-star army outside the city like a dumpling. The night passed in fear and trepidation. Every half an hour there would be cannonballs entering the city from outside. Occasionally, there would be small groups of 5-star army attacking the city, causing the Southern Ming army to be extremely annoyed. When the sun rose, most of them had dark circles under their eyes and looked very tired. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. After breakfast, the large-scale cannonballs started again. Unlike the small skirmishes at night, the cannonballs during the day were much more intense. In just one morning, after 3 waves of cannonballs, there were more than 5,000 injured soldiers in the city and more than 3,000 dead. The reason why there was so much damage was because the 5-star army's cannonballs were much fiercer than yesterday. Secondly, there were too many Southern Ming army soldiers in the city. Sometimes, a single cannonball could kill a few people and injure a dozen or more. Under such attacks, the Southern Ming army began to lose a lot of soldiers. There was no need to talk about the dead as they could no longer speak and had already become history. However, those who were still alive and injured were really a headache. They kept wailing, which was a huge blow to the morale of the army. Especially when the 5-star army outside the city would send people to persuade them to surrender after every half an hour of cannonballs, saying that they were willing to take in the injured soldiers. This was like an outlet for everyone to vent their frustrations. More and more injured soldiers began to clamor to leave the city. Even though Guan Ying sent out his personal guards and even promised these injured soldiers that he had already asked for help from the imperial court and that more doctors would come soon, the problem was still not solved. This was because in the span of last night and this morning, there were more than 200 injured soldiers who died because they did not receive treatment in time. Looking at their comrades who were shouting the same slogan as them dying in front of them, the other injured soldiers did not care about anything else in order to survive. They all shouted loudly and made the same demands and slogan. After another afternoon of cannonballs, there were thousands more injured soldiers. When their group reached more than 10,000 people, the slogan was so loud that it could be heard clearly in any part of the city. General Li Hani had a bitter expression as he walked into Guan Ying's temporary residence. There were some words that he had to say. Guan Ying received Li Hani in the main hall. When he saw the other party's dark expression, he knew what the other party was going to say. He shook his head and said, "General Li, this general understands your intentions, but you really can't do this. Don't tell me you want to watch these injured soldiers die?" Li Hani finally could not hold back the anger in his chest. Among these injured soldiers, there were actually many from the Wide Sea Guards. They used to be his comrades. Now that they were going to die from injuries as a general, he naturally did not feel good. "Calm down, bear with it. How about this? Give me 3 more days and see the situation first." Guan Ying did not immediately agree, but he did not refuse either. He was very clear that a general like Li Hani was very influential. If he joined forces with others to force him to abdicate, the situation would be the worst. Therefore he could not directly refuse. The reason why he said to wait for 3 more days was mainly because he was hoping for a fluke. For example, was the 5-star army about to run out of ammunition? Bombarding like this every day consumed a lot of gunpowder. Perhaps they could not hold on any longer? Or perhaps the injured soldiers had thought it through, or everyone had gotten used to their cries. More importantly, he had already sent people out to look for reinforcements. Even if the imperial court's reinforcements would not arrive so quickly, as long as they could bring him news of reinforcements, it would be enough to motivate him and give him a reason to hold on. In short, he would drag it on for as long as he could. The situation might change at any time. Since Guan Ying had already said so, what else could Li Hani say? The imperial edict clearly stated that the Battle of the Guangzhou Prefecture had to follow Guan Ying's orders. If that was the case, he would wait for 3 more days. The bombardment continued, as did the persuasion to surrender. Yang Qindong did not order the soldiers to attack the city. He only continued to bombard the city with cannons. The situation on the battlefield was also somewhat lukewarm. Compared to the battlefield in front of the Guangzhou Prefecture, the Nanchang Prefecture was about to fall into chaos. Jiangxi consisted of Nanchang Prefecture, Guangxin Prefecture, Raozhou Prefecture, Nankang Prefecture, Jiujiang Prefecture, Ruizhou Prefecture, Yuanzhou Prefecture, Linjiang Prefecture, Fuzhou Prefecture, Jianchang Prefecture, Dian Prefecture, Ganzhou Prefecture, and Nan'an Prefecture. One was San Prefecture, Ning Prefecture. There were 77 counties below. Due to the large territory, although it was not the fragrance of fish and rice, nor was it a heavily taxed area of the southern Ming Empire, it was still a strategic location. This time the southern Ming Empire had sent 200,000 soldiers here. In addition to the 100,000 soldiers from the original province, there was a total of 300,000 soldiers. Although it was not as strong as the 450,000 soldiers of the Guangzhou Prefecture, it was still a strong military force. Although Jiangxi's secretary of the left, Li Qing, was very nervous, he was relieved when he learned that the 5-star army had only sent a little over 100,000 soldiers. The reinforcements sent by the imperial court were led by General He Ku. When the command of the 300,000 soldiers was handed over to him, one could clearly see that he was excited. He Ku was a veteran general in the army. He was in his 40s and he was at his most mature and stable age. However, the moment he held military power, he unknowingly became arrogant. He Ku, who did not come from a good background, had relied on his own efforts to get to where he was today. Because of this, he desired power more than others. Now that he finally had power in his hands, he wanted to perform well. Especially when he learned that the 5-star army only had a little over 100,000 soldiers, which was a third of his forces, he decided to take the initiative to attack. The 300,000 soldiers were organized into 6 square formations by He Ku. Each formation had 50,000 soldiers. 3 of them were in charge of facing the enemy head-on, 1 was in charge of attacking from the back, and the other 2 were in charge of flanking the enemy. Once they formed an encirclement, it would be time for them to attack from all sides. This matter was decided. In the past, when he led troops to suppress bandits, he did this. Reality proved that this method was very effective. Chapter 1687. With a single order, the 300,000 southern Ming soldiers moved separately. Such a large formation was naturally seen by Xianxia's spies in Nanchang. Following this, a telegram was sent over to the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army, Tian Hu, who was also a member of the military council. Now that Tian Hu had entered the military council, his position was no longer just the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army. What he needed to do was to look at the overall situation and guide it. Naturally, this time he was the leader of the army in Nanchang. When the telegram was sent to him, a burst of laughter was heard. Good. This he really knows me well. It was no wonder that Tian Hu was so happy. When he learned from the telegram that the southern Ming army in Guangzhou was like a tortoise hiding in the city, Tian Hu thought that the enemy in Nanchang would do the same. If that was the case, the world's #1 cavalry army would not have the chance to show off their strength. They would still have to rely on the guns and cannons of the cold front. However, he did not expect that the enemy would choose to take the initiative to attack. Wasn't this exactly what he wanted? After a few months of rest, the world's #1 cavalry army was not only filled with soldiers, but some of the older soldiers had also retired. Now the entire army was filled with men between the ages of 18 and 30. It could be said that their strength was at its peak. If there was something that they lacked, it would be the experience of life and death on the battlefield. Originally, they thought that it would be good if they did not encounter any soldiers or bandits along the way. They could also train their soldiers. Who would have thought that such a large number of enemies would be sent to them? How could they not be happy? Although this bone was indeed a bit big and fat, the world's #1 cavalry army had always been strong. Moreover, with cavalry against infantry, even if the enemy outnumbered them by a few times, Tian Hu was still confident that he could take them down. Tian Hu gathered the 5 division commanders under him and began to plan a battle strategy against the 300,000 enemies. According to Tian Hu's plan, Teimuer's division and Lu Duo's division would be the vanguard. They had to create the momentum of the main force to inflict heavy damage to the enemy and attract the enemy's attention. 3rd Division Hu Jinru's division would be the left flank, 4th Division Su Keda's division would be the right flank, and 5th Division Yu Zhong's division would be the rear flank. In the temporary tent, Tian Hu had his hands on his waist. He was wearing the military uniform of a 2nd-rank general, and his 4 golden beads were shining brightly. 3-rank general with 3 stars, 2nd rank with 4 stars, and 1st-rank generals with 5 stars. This was a military rank that he had received after becoming a member of the military commission. Brothers, I'm sure everyone knows that the world's #1 cavalry army is going to expand into a group army. When the time comes, all 5 of you here will be army commanders. This will also be the last battle before our #1 army expands into a group army. I hope that all of you can show us our prowess. Isn't it just 50,000 against 300,000? Let me tell you, our opponents are all infantrymen and most of them are rookies who have never seen blood before. You can definitely fight 1 against 6. Now let me ask you, do you have the confidence? Yes. Teimuer and the others shouted loudly. They knew clearly that this was not only their last battle before becoming army commanders, but also their best chance to show off in front of Tian Hu. Think about it, with a member of the military commission as their direct superior. How big was this thigh? If they didn't show off now, when would they be able to? As for fighting 1 against 6, even if it was cavalry against cavalry, they could easily fight 1 against 3 or even 1 against 4 with their 7-star crossbows and dual blade techniques. Now with cavalry against infantrymen, it was just 1 against 6. It wasn't difficult at all. Not to mention, as long as they performed well and fought resolutely, the South Ming army, who had never seen blood before, would easily collapse. At that time, not to mention 300,000, even 500,000 or more wouldn't be their opponents. Good, everyone go and prepare. Make use of the time to eat and drink. We will attack in 4 hours. Tian Hu laughed loudly and said confidently. After arranging for his subordinates to prepare, the commander of the 5th Division Xiao Yining and the commander of the 3rd Division Qi Wen walked into the main tent together. As soon as they met, Xiao Yining complained, "Commander, it's not that bad. The world's #1 cavalry army eats meat, but we also need to drink soup, right?" The Xiao family's attitude was very humble. If it wasn't for the fact that Tian, who was the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army, he might not have even looked them in the eye. If it wasn't for the fact that Tian, who was the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army, he might not have even looked them in the eye. But now it was different. Tian, who was one of the 5 members of the military commission. He was 100% the commander. If he didn't like the cold front, he could pick on them. Now he had no choice but to lower his head. Even Xiao Yining had such an attitude, let alone Qi Wen, a surrendered general. Although he had made a great contribution to the 5-star army and was recognized by Yang Chendong, he was also put in an important position. He was even included in the Han nationality book. However, he was very clear that in front of Tian Hu and Xiao Yining, the absolute main force of the 5-star army, he was still an outsider. Tian Hu was in a good mood. He looked at Xiao Yining and spoke more politely. Sigh. Since Commander Xiao knows that this might be the last time the world's #1 cavalry army makes an appearance, isn't that enough to satisfy our request? Also, the cold front is about to expand soon. Didn't the Navy expand by 12 divisions before? Let me tell you, it's your army's turn next. Because he was a member of the military commission, Tian Hu naturally knew some things in advance. Because the matter had already been reported to Yang Chendong and had been approved, it wasn't a mistake to tell Xiao Yining in advance. As soon as he said this, Xiao Yining's attention was diverted. Is that so? Commander, how many divisions should our cold front expand? Is there a military establishment? A soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier. Xiao Yining's experience was also very old. For someone like him, if he wanted to leave the cold front, he could easily become a commander in another army. It wasn't impossible for him to even become a commander of a group army. However, after becoming familiar with the strength of the cold front, who would be willing to lead a ragtag army? They could only wait for a promotion within the cold front. Unfortunately, in the past few years, the other armies had been expanding. Some turned from regiments to divisions, some turned from divisions to armies, and some even turned into group armies. However, the cold front didn't expand because it wanted to maintain enough fighting power. It wasn't easy for them to expand during the new year, but they only expanded the cold front. They had 12 more divisions, which meant they had 3 more armies. This gave Xiao Yining and the other commanders of the cold front a glimmer of hope and envy. They originally thought that the cold front was expanding because they were forced to enter the west. Who would have thought that the cold front was also expanding? Didn't this mean that there would be a commander position waiting for him? How could he not be anxious and excited? The specific expansion plan still needs to be discussed in detail. After all, the cold front is the most elite army. Tian Hu shook his head. It wasn't that he didn't want to say it, but that he didn't know either. This was because Yang Chendong had only approved Lu Lingfeng's plan to expand the army, but the exact number of people and how many divisions or armies were still to be discussed. Although Xiao Yining looked disappointed, he knew that the expansion plan was already set in stone. This already made him very satisfied. He didn't mention the fact that the cold front wasn't going to be part of this battle. After dealing with Xiao Yining, Tian Hu looked at Qi Wen, who still had the rank of senior colonel, and saluted. Commander Qi, wait for 2 hours after the 1st Sky Cavalry Regiment charged out. You can go. Yes, Commander. Qi Wen felt bitter. He knew that the Meng 3 masters were going to clean up the battlefield. Although they couldn't eat meat, if they performed well, they would still be rewarded. Moreover, their brothers wouldn't have to take risks. Qi Wen was quite satisfied with this result. After dealing with the 2 commanders, Tian Hu went straight to the kitchen. He didn't know how long the upcoming battle would take, so he had to fill his stomach in advance to have the strength to kill the enemy. At this time, General He didn't know that his actions were being watched by the 5-star army and the strongest cavalry regiment, the 1st Sky Cavalry Regiment. At this moment he was still leading the army forward. He had already looked at the map and chose a place called Lijiapo as the battlefield. There was only one official road that allowed people to pass through. On both sides of the official road were high slopes. The official road was wide enough for the army to spread out in formation and was suitable for an ambush. For the sake of safety and secrecy, the South Ming army set off before dawn. By the time they arrived at Lijiapa, it was already noon. The soldiers were very tired from the journey. Normally, he should have ordered them to prepare for the battlefield. However, after considering the soldiers' request, He ordered them to cook to solve the problem of their stomachs. If he could immediately take advantage of the terrain and prepare for the arrival of the 5-star army, they would still have a chance to win this battle. After all, they had the advantage of numbers and terrain. It was a pity that he wasted such a good opportunity. When the scouts at the front reported that the main cavalry of the 5-star army was less than 10 li away, He became anxious. He immediately ordered the army to stop eating and enter the battlefield. After knowing that it was cavalry, he ordered people to quickly take out the stakes and other things to prepare. They were a group of new soldiers who had never been on the battlefield before. In a hurry, everyone was a bit flustered. Many people sprained their feet because they ran too fast. Before the battle even started, there were already people who were injured. This caused He to curse out loud. Needless to say, the first group to appear was Teimuer's 1st Division and Lu Duo's 2nd Division. With the idea of being bold, they didn't do much scouting along the way. When the scout cavalries in the front reported back that they saw smoke above Li Jiapa, the 2 division commanders exchanged glances with each other before chuckling. With their many years of battle experience, they could feel that Li Jiapa should be the pocket formation that the South Ming army had set up for them. Chapter 1688. They didn't even know that they couldn't light a fire while marching. It seemed like the ability of the Southern Ming Army's commander was only average. How could Teimuer and Lu Duo know that He's biggest battle was to suppress bandits? Naturally, he didn't need to be so careful when doing such a thing. Immediately send someone to report to the military commander. Tell him that the enemy is most likely setting up an ambush at Li Jiapa. In order to catch them off guard, our 1st and 2nd divisions have decided to take the initiative to attack. I hope that the military commander will immediately arrange for the other divisions to surround them. The 1st Division commander, Teimuer, said to the telegraphist beside him. After the telegraphist finished recording the contents and left, Teimuer said to Lu Duo, "How about it? Do you want to compete? All right. Let's see who can fight more fiercely and kill more people." Lu Duo laughed, unwilling to pass on his responsibility. "Okay, inform the rest to prepare for battle. Put on your armor and take out your Big Dipper crossbows." Teimuer laughed heartily as he galloped on his horse. In an instant, a cloud of dust rose with the wind and surged towards Li Jiapa like a tornado. On the official road, the sky was filled with yellow sand. Looking from afar, it was impossible to tell how many cavalrymen there were. One could only feel the number of cavalrymen from the sound of the war horses galloping on the ground. As the saying went, 10,000 cavalrymen were boundless. This kind of formation couldn't be described with words. General Hiku, who was setting up an ambush at Li Jiapa, became excited when he heard the rumbling sounds of the war horses galloping on the ground. He knew that the main force of the 5-star army had arrived. This meant that his chance to make a big contribution had arrived. Hiku, who was too excited, didn't pay attention to the reactions of the Southern Ming soldiers beside him. These people were either born in the military and worked in the fields and rarely received training. Some of them were still working with hoes a while ago, but now they were given swords and sabers to become soldiers. It was impossible to expect them to perform well. When they heard the rumbling sounds of the war horses galloping on the ground, many people were already covered in cold sweat. Some were even trembling in fear and didn't know what to do. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the world's #1 cavalry army was an army that had been through hundreds of battles. Whenever there was a big battle to be fought, his figure could be seen. Together with Yang Chendong, they fought in the north and south, conquering vast territories. Many of these cavalrymen could be described as murderous. The number of non-humankind cavalrymen and infantrymen who died in their hands was countless times greater than the number of jihaos. Even Wallace Yeshen had to flee at the sight of this elite cavalry. Hiku actually wanted to use infantry to intercept them. He was truly ignorant and fearless. He did not know how to write the word death. In the end, it wasn't entirely Hoku's fault. After all, the biggest mission he had completed before was to exterminate the bandits. When Xianxia's 5-star army made a name for themselves and continued to expand their territory, how could there be any enemies around the Southern Ming Empire? Even if they wanted to go to war, they didn't have the chance. He was only a general in charge of exterminating the bandits. How could he know the power of the war horses? In Hoku's eyes, it was the same as what he knew. Once the imperial army appeared, the horse bandits and mountain bandits would surrender. The 5-star army was also human. They should do the same. His strength wasn't strong and he underestimated the strength of his opponent. This was already the end for Hoku. It was just that he didn't know it yet. The 5-star army's cavalrymen arrived very quickly. The vanguard didn't hesitate to plunge into Li Jiapa. Then they saw the southern Ming Empire's army on the official road not far away. Looking from afar there were many people. Could even be described as a sea of people. Hundreds of barricades were placed in the middle of the official road. Many southern Ming archers were already prepared to shoot. It was as if this was a trap and whoever fell into it would be dead for sure. It was obvious that this was an ambush. However, in the eyes of Taimur and Lu Duo, these were just decorations. They didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. On the contrary, they even increased the speed of their war horses. The vanguard cavalrymen had already taken out their iron hooks and charged towards the barricades in front of them. Good, they're all in. They're all in. Hoku was excited. He was afraid that the enemy would immediately escape when they saw this formation. If that was the case, his ambush would be useless. If he really let the infantrymen and cavalrymen fight on the plains, even if he hadn't seen the power of cavalrymen, he knew that the situation would be disadvantageous for him. The cavalrymen had indeed entered the encirclement, but they didn't panic. Many iron hooks were thrown out and the barricades in front of them were dragged to the side. The world's first cavalry army had done this countless times. They were so familiar with it that they were as agile as their limbs. Don't let them remove the barricades. Shoot. The 5-star army's cavalryman's reaction was beyond Hoku's expectations. He thought that these barricades would cause damage to the cavalrymen and even cause chaos. If that was the case, he would be able to take advantage of the situation and kill them. But now, seeing the barricades being removed one by one, the main road was about to be cleared. The cavalrymen would be left with nothing but flat plains. He was anxious and didn't care if he was within the range of the arrows. He shouted loudly. The South Ming Army's recruits were already frightened by the might of the 5-star army's cavalrymen. They were just used to listening to their general's orders. They didn't care whether the arrows would hit their opponents or not. They only knew that releasing the arrows could boost their courage and scare the enemy. That was enough. At that moment, countless arrows flew out from the front. But because the distance was too far, they couldn't reach the 5-star army's cavalrymen. Not to mention, some of the recruits had limited strength and didn't have any archery skills. They couldn't shoot from a distance and couldn't be accurate. A wave of arrows flew out and landed a few steps away from the 5-star army's cavalrymen. Taimur and Lu Duo were stunned when they saw this scene. At first, they thought that the South Ming army was doing something and that it was some new attack method. But when they saw that the arrows had indeed landed and didn't cause any damage, the two of them finally understood that this was the archery skills of the South Ming army's recruits. Haha, these recruits probably haven't eaten their fill. Taimur laughed heartily. Commander Lu Duo, who was standing at the side, also smiled. However, his mind was still very clear, and he gave the order to charge ahead of Taimur. Old Lu, you're not being considerate. You attacked first. Brothers of the 1st Division charge. Taimur panicked when he saw the 2 ND Division's cavalrymen charging out first. He didn't want to lose to Lu Duo. He waved his saber and the 1 ST Division's cavalrymen also started to charge crazily. Another wave of yellow sand filled the sky, giving people the feeling that it covered the sky. Dozens of arrows appeared naturally in an array and were aimed directly at the South Ming army's front. Hiku's roar sounded again. Release the arrows, release the arrows. Shield bearers in the first row, spearmen in the second row. Defend, defend. Soldiers at the back, get ready to meet the enemy. Meet the enemy. Perhaps it was because he was too excited or too anxious, but Hiku shouted out orders one after another. Then the South Ming army became a little chaotic. Although they had undergone a short period of training before entering the battlefield, it was just a formality. Everyone knew that soldiers had to be trained and their meals had to be kept up. Without sufficient military funds and food, or perhaps it could be said that all of this was under the supervision of the civil officials who looked down on generals, the new soldiers had never truly undergone any training. Once a general had a request and wanted to train elite soldiers, the civil officials in charge of logistics would stand up and reject the request on the grounds that this wasn't a battlefield and there was no need to be so strict and serious. In the end, they didn't want the soldiers to exhaust too much energy and waste too much food because of training. This was the result of using literature to control military force. In front of these scholars who boasted that they were a cut above others, fighting and killing was something that only boorish people would do. These people's lives were naturally as cheap as dogs and weren't worth investing in. Due to the lack of training, many of the recruits were thrown into chaos on the battlefield. Especially when He Ku's orders were given one after another. Many people didn't even understand what was going on with the first order before the second order was given. This caused a situation of chaos on the battlefield. On the battlefield, a delay of a minute or a second could lead to a missed opportunity and lead to a huge mistake. Facing the attack of the world's #1 cavalry army, the South Ming army actually showed signs of chaos. As the vanguard, how could the 2nd Cavalry Division give up such a good opportunity? They immediately increased their speed and at the same time, they held the Big Dipper crossbow in their hands. This kind of close combat weapon that could fire continuously, other than its range being inferior to a flintlock, was already very powerful. It was because of this that the world's #1 cavalry army was able to win battles with a small number of troops and complete seemingly impossible missions. 200 steps. 150 steps. 100 steps. 80 steps. They were getting closer and closer. The South Ming army's arrows once again flew out and landed in front of the charging warriors of the world's #1 cavalry army. Caused a certain number of casualties, but if one looked carefully it was very effective. Apart from the cavalry's skillful horsemanship, which allowed them to perform various evasive maneuvers to avoid the arrows, the armor on their bodies also played a great role in protecting them. This kind of armor was 3 centimeters thicker than ordinary armor and could block most of the arrows from entering the body. Even if they were hit, as long as it wasn't a critical position, they would only be lightly injured. Especially when they were around 60 steps away, the damage of the arrows seemed to increase. The tips of the arrows that were charging at the front were hit and had no choice but to retreat and rest. However, the damage only stopped there. When the distance was only 50 steps or even closer, the Big Dipper crossbow showed its power. Chapter 1689. This type of crossbow could fire a single shot or 7 shots in a row. Once the distance was right, it would display its unique power. One after another, the crossbows flew forward and fell into the Southern Ming army like steel needles. Cries of pain sounded from all directions. The Big Dipper crossbow could even fire a fan-shaped attack, dealing heavy damage to the enemy. Because they were the first and second rows of Southern Ming archers, they were wearing thin clothes. Only a few of them had leather armor and most of them didn't even have battle armor. Facing the incomparably sharp Big Dipper crossbow, what could they use to block it? It was as if they would directly fall if they were hit by a single arrow. If they were lucky, the soldiers who weren't hit screamed and threw away their bows and began to roll on the ground. Just the 7-star crossbows of the vanguard cavalry had caused a lot of damage, causing the archers of the South Ming army to suffer heavy losses. At the same time, they had cleared a path for them to continue attacking, and at the same time, they had also cut off the threat that the archers of the South Ming army might bring. Under the attack of the 7-star crossbow, the Southern Ming army's third row of shield-bearers appeared in front of the cavalry. Although because of the chaos, the shield-bearers weren't completely in formation because there were enough people, they gave off a feeling of great momentum. Attack! The dozens of cavalrymen at the front shouted loudly. Then they pulled out their sharp sabers from their waists. They borrowed the momentum of their horses and used their speed to directly attack the shield-bearers in front of them. The sabers used by the world's #1 cavalry army were all specially polished. Whether it was the sharpness or the toughness, they were several times stronger than ordinary swords. Those foreign race cavalrymen and infantrymen who had fought with them all fearfully called them treasured sabers. When the treasured sabers were unsheathed, they carried killing intent and coldness. When they landed on the shields, the ordinary shields were instantly split in half. The Southern Ming soldiers who should have been hiding behind the shields were thus revealed. The power of the treasured sabers greatly exceeded the expectations of the shield-bearers. When they realized that the weapons that could theoretically protect them were useless and their bodies were completely exposed to the enemy cavalry, their desire to live made them turn around and flee. They didn't care that the pikemen behind them had already extended their pikes and were waiting for the cavalry to charge forward. The shield blocked the path and the spear extended. This was one of the common tactics used by infantrymen against cavalry. Especially when the Southern Ming army had the absolute advantage in numbers, this kind of defense and counterattack could often cause a lot of damage to the cavalry. As long as they could stop the enemy's charge and slow down their speed, the advantage of the cavalry would be greatly reduced. Then it would be time for the infantry to counterattack. Unfortunately, all of this was just a theory. When the shields disappeared and the soldiers charged forward, they would directly crash into the spearmen behind them, causing the formation to become chaotic. This so-called theory would not work at all. Before the formation of the pikemen could even come into contact with the enemy cavalry, they were already in chaos, which greatly reduced their power. By the time the cavalry truly charged over, the tip of the pikemen disappeared with a flash of saber light. The pikemen's counterattack was reduced to nothing. More than 100 years later, the scene of the slave construction cavalry charging to kill the Great Ming army happened in advance. The difference was that this time, it was the 5-star army that was attacking. The difference was that the 5-star army's attack was more ferocious than the slave construction cavalry. After the formation of the archers, shield soldiers and pikemen were broken, the defense of the Southern Ming army was quickly paralyzed. Countless Southern Ming soldiers began to desperately run to the back. At this time they had already forgotten their mission. They only knew that if they rushed back they might have a chance to live. The development of the situation on the battlefield was completely different from what they had imagined. It wasn't that whoever had more people would win. If this was the case, then each country didn't need to go to war. They could just directly develop their population. Although the 5-star army only had 20,000 cavalrymen, they were all elite veterans. Even the newly recruited soldiers were the best of the best. They were all people who had seen blood and killed people before. Compared to the Southern Ming army, which was full of new recruits, many of them hadn't even killed a chicken before. This was simply incomparable. Once the 7-star crossbows were used, the Southern Ming army's formation was disrupted. Then when the people borrowed the horses' momentum and the sabers' speed to rush into the somewhat chaotic Southern Ming army, the slaughter began. Although these were all Han people and would be the cornerstone of the Xianxia's development in the future, in order to obtain a great victory and completely defeat the Southern Ming imperial court, they could only endure the pain and kill. This was also in order to preserve more Han people. Blood splattered everywhere. Human lives were like grass. The battlefield had always been cruel. It wasn't a game of life and death. If one had a kind heart, the only one who would die would be himself. When everyone understood this principle, the only thing left was to kill. After the tip of the arrows pierced into the Southern Ming army, it was like a large meat grinder. Any Southern Ming soldiers who were in front of the 5-star army or who dodged a little slower had their heads and limbs separated from their bodies. The smell of blood rushed into the noses of the Southern Ming recruits. Ugh. Wug. The Southern Ming recruits who had never experienced this kind of battle only felt waves of nausea. Then they had no choice but to squat on the ground and vomit. Especially when the warhorses of the 5-star army galloped past and trampled the corpses on the ground like mud. The visual impact made the Southern Ming Empire recruits unable to control their bodies. They didn't even have the strength to wield their swords and spears. Other than vomiting, they could only vomit. Everyone stand up. Don't squat down. Don't put down your weapons. Hiku saw the situation develop to this point and roared in anger. Unfortunately, on the chaotic battlefield under the sound of the horses' hooves, his shout was quickly drowned out and couldn't cause any waves. General, let's retreat. We can't stop them. A soldier came in front of Hiku and said this sentence. Then he directly carried Hiku, who was still cursing, and retreated to the back of the army. This was only a formation of 60,000 people. Behind them, there was still a formation of 60,000 people standing there intact. As long as they regrouped with them, they wouldn't have to worry about not having a chance to counterattack. Hiku retreated, and this scene was discovered by some of the recruits. At that moment, their last bit of will to resist no longer existed. They either fled in all directions or threw down their weapons and knelt on the ground to surrender. The army was defeated like a landslide. Even if there were 60,000 pigs, it would take at least a few days for the 20,000 cavalrymen of the 5-star army to capture them. But now, under the iron hooves of the 5-star army's cavalrymen, the 60,000 infantrymen couldn't even hold on for an hour and were completely defeated. On the battlefield, the fighting spirit of the Southern Ming recruits was rapidly disintegrating. Even Tei Mu and Lu Duo, who were leading the troops, didn't expect this scene. They originally thought that with so many troops they would still have to hold on for a while. But now it seemed that victory came too suddenly. This was a good thing. Without needing to give orders, the 5-star army's cavalrymen chased after He Ku's retreating footsteps. In front of them there were countless southern Ming recruits. These people didn't choose to surrender immediately. Instead they wanted to escape back to their own camp. Because they chose to escape, their existence was a great threat to the 60,000 people behind them. When they saw the 5-star army's cavalrymen coming and saw that there were more of their own comrades in front of the cavalrymen, the commanding general was somewhat helpless. He didn't even dare to give the order to shoot arrows because it was very likely that the arrows wouldn't hit the enemy cavalrymen, but their own infantrymen. He Ku was also running among the defeated troops. When he saw that the 60,000 people behind them didn't choose to shoot arrows, he heaved a sigh of relief. Now that he was among the defeated troops, wouldn't he also lose his life if he released arrows? There was only one thing on his mind right now, and that was to escape to the rear. These 5-star army cavalry were too ferocious and he would not fight with them in the future. It was better for him to obediently retreat back to Nanchang City and guard it. He Ku, who only cared about escaping, even forgot to let the troops lying in ambush on both sides of the official road attack. Or rather, even if he remembered now, he had no way to inform them. This was a somewhat dramatic defeat, and the development of the battle was beyond everyone's expectations. Reality also proved that the Southern Ming New Army's combat strength could not only be described as ordinary, it could even be described as terrible. 300,000 infantrymen faced the charge of 20,000 cavalrymen. Not to mention the ability to retaliate, they couldn't even put up a basic resistance. No one would have any confidence that such an army could protect the Southern Ming imperial court. Taimu and General Lu Duo were still leading the charge. They charged again and again, and in front of them were the defeated Southern Ming soldiers that were continuously retreating. Among them were the 60,000 people behind them. After seeing that the front line had already been defeated and fleeing, and seeing the bravery of the 5-star army's cavalrymen, as well as the heads that would fly on the battlefield from time to time, the 60,000 Southern Ming recruits who were guarding the rear also began to flee. Some of them, in order to escape faster, directly threw their weapons to the ground and continued to run, fiercely charging toward Nanchang that was 60 li behind them. Wherever the 5-star army's cavalrymen passed, there were either corpses covered in blood, captives kneeling on the ground, or Southern Ming recruits fleeing in all directions. There was no resistance at all, and this made the two division commanders even more ambitious. Nanchang. Taimu and Lu Duo said at almost the same time. Then there was a burst of laughter. The 20,000 cavalrymen who didn't suffer too many casualties, gave up on their pursuers and headed straight for Nanchang that was 60 li away. Chapter 1690. Instead of capturing captives everywhere, it would be better to directly attack the Nanchang prefecture. As long as they occupied the place, these deserters would become turtles in a jar and would not be able to escape. Of course, when they were attacking, they did not forget to send a telegram to Tianhu, who was behind them. They gave a simple summary of their thoughts and the situation on the battlefield. When the telegram was sent to Tianhu, he was leading the army towards Li Jiapa. They were not moving at their fastest speed. Tianhu's idea was to let the two cavalry divisions consume the enemy's strength. When the enemy was exhausted, he would suddenly appear with the main force and win. He never thought that the battle would go so smoothly. Tianhu could only give up his previous plan and said to the telegram operator, "Immediately send a telegram to the 3rd, 4th and 5th divisions. Tell them to quickly go to the battlefield and capture the captives. Order the army to speed up. Tell everyone that if they are late they will not be able to drink the soup. Lastly, send a telegram to the 3rd division. Tell them to speed up and take care of the captives." Telegrams were sent out one after another. At this time, if one could look down from the sky, they would see that with Li Jiapa as the center, there were several cavalry units moving quickly and surrounding him. Behind the cavalry, there was also the 5th division of the Lu Lingfeng division. Although they were the last to set out, they were quickly approaching the battlefield with their 3-wheeled motorcycles. Their vanguard had even caught up with the 3rd division. Nanchang Prefecture. The sky was getting dark. There were scattered soldiers standing guard on the city walls. But from their relaxed expressions, they did not realize that the battle was about to begin. There was less than half an hour before the city gates closed. The soldiers on the city walls began to gather in twos and threes to chat. From time to time they would even laugh. They were so relaxed because they were very optimistic about the situation on the front line. After all, the 300,000 infantrymen were already prepared. They were only facing the 100,000 five-star army from afar. They should have a high chance of winning. Even if they could not win in a short time, they could still be in a stalemate. As for the Nanchang prefecture, it could be said that it was safe. Since that was the case, why was there a need to be so nervous? Not only the soldiers but even Li Qingzhua, the political envoy of the city, was also holding a banquet for the tyrants in the city. Once the war started, they would need a lot of money and food. There was only one reason why they had gathered these people, and that was to ask them to donate money and get food. Li Qing was very confident in doing this. After all, Xianxia's policies had already spread throughout the southern Ming dynasty. Those who surrendered could take 20% of their family's wealth and move out. Those who didn't surrender and did evil would be killed and their property confiscated. Those who didn't surrender and didn't do evil would be captured and released. They could only take 10% of their family's wealth and move out. This kind of policy was unacceptable to all magnates. Why should they hand over the wealth and land that they had worked so hard to create for several generations? With such a sharp contradiction, there was only one way to resolve it, and that was to fight. It would be best if they could defeat the five-star army. At the very least, they had to keep them out of the city. That way they could continue to live above others. For the sake of their better days, they could only donate some money and food. Although they felt some heartache, they could only do as they were told. When Li Qing's invitation was sent to the tyrants, they all thought about it and came. For a moment, the Li residence was very lively, and it didn't feel like a war was about to break out. At this moment outside the city, Teimu'er and Lu Duo finally arrived with the cavalry before the city gates were closed. Then they ignored their fatigue and directly attacked Nanchang City. When a large number of cavalry arrived, the southern Ming soldiers guarding the city gate were still confused about what was going on. When they felt the ground beneath their feet tremble, they looked in front of them in shock. When someone with sharp eyes saw that it was a cavalry with a bright red five-star army flag, he couldn't help but shout, "It's the five-star army's cavalry. Quick, quick, close the city gates." At this moment, it was too late to close the city gates. The five-star army's cavalry at the front had already drawn their bows and arrows. After a series of xiu 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 sounds pierced through the air, the southern Ming soldiers who were rushing towards the city gate were shot down to the ground. This frightened the other southern Ming soldiers. These new recruits who had never been on the battlefield and had never seen blood before did not continue to take the risk to close the city gates. They didn't even have the courage to go into the city to report. Instead, they tactfully knelt on the ground, threw down their weapons and made a gesture of surrender. They were able to do this mostly because the five-star army's appearance was too sudden and ruthless. After all, no one wanted to die, so no one would take the risk. Another reason was that to the commoners, it was the same no matter who ruled over them. The southern Ming dynasty did not treat them well. Especially in the past few years, the taxes had been constantly increasing. Some commoners could no longer live, and there were even some who directly left their homeland for the Xianxia's territory. It was said that the Han people there were treated very well. Not only were they able to eat their fill and wear warm clothes, but they were also given a lot of farmland and lived a better life. Those who stayed were not necessarily loyal to the southern Ming dynasty. They just didn't want to leave because of various reasons. Now that the five-star army's cavalry was in front of them, why would they risk their lives for the southern Ming dynasty? They might as well just surrender. In any case, they had no money, no power, and no farmland. Apart from their lives, they had nothing. Could the cavalry kill them? This was the true portrayal of the commoner's mentality under the feudal dynasty. Between the rise and fall of the dynasty, the commoners were usually the most indifferent. They didn't have high demands and only wanted to survive. Apart from a few rotten dynasties, most of them were very tolerant of the commoners. Therefore, the change of dynasty was always a struggle between the upper echelons. There were very few commoners who participated in it. Even if there were people who participated, there were only a few people. It was just like when the Japanese invaded China. The commoners also held such thoughts. This was why they were ruled for 8 years and even longer in some areas. If the commoners could all stand up and resist, Then they would all be able to wash the Japanese into the sea and feed them to the sharks. Temujin and Lu Duo smoothly entered the city. Then several Xianxia secret agents came out from the city gates. They took out items that could prove their identity and gained the trust of the cavalry. Then they immediately rushed to the most important places in Nanchang City. Poor Li Qing was still receiving the guests in the mansion when suddenly, a servant came to report that the 5-star army had entered the city. Li Qing, who had drunk a little too much, didn't hear it clearly. He thought that there was something wrong with his ears. He actually laughed and said, "Did this official hear wrongly? What did you just say? The 5-star army was defeated?" Seeing that Li Qing was still not sober, the soldier who came to report couldn't help but raise his voice and shouted, "Sir, it wasn't that the 5-star army was defeated. They entered the city and have already surrounded our Li mansion." The voice was so loud that this time, Li Qing heard it clearly. Because of this, he froze in place and looked at the soldier who came to report with an incredulous expression. He wanted to know what was going on. Was it the servants' nonsense, or did the 5-star army really enter the city? There was no need to verify. There were already sounds of fighting outside the mansion. It was the mansion's soldiers fighting with the 5-star army cavalry. Unfortunately, the battle only lasted for a short period of time before a large number of footsteps could be heard heading towards the residence. Not good, it must be the 5-star army. Quickly run. When the other nobles saw that the situation was bad, they quickly stood up and wanted to rush to the door. Then countless sabers were erected in front of them, forcing them to retreat. A burly man with the insignia of a major general walked into the hall with a smile. Who else could it be but Taimur? When he saw so many people in bright clothes gathered here, he couldn't help but laugh and say, "Not bad, everyone should be here. Since that's the case, capture them all. Kill anyone who resists." In the face of the ferocious Taimur, everyone stopped resisting. They could feel the killing intent coming from this general and his soldiers. They believed that if they really dared to resist, they would be the next to die. More than 2 hours before the fall of Nanchang City, Tian, who also brought his army to Lijiapa and attacked the 200,000 new South Ming soldiers who were still lying in ambush here, waiting for orders. When the ambushers became the target of the ambush, the morale of the South Ming soldiers quickly collapsed. When the Lung Feng 5th Division and Meng Sanshi arrived, they began to capture the captives. In this battle, more than 12,000 of the 300,000 South Ming soldiers died. Most of them were trampled to death. Tens of thousands were injured and more than 200,000 were captured. Even the general He Ku was captured at night. In the end, less than 20,000 people escaped. Even these 20,000 people didn't report to the other South Ming government offices. It was obvious that they were scared by the 5-star army. They changed from soldiers back to commoners. On the day of Nanchang Prefecture's complete victory, gunshots rang out in Xianxia Prefecture, and the sounds of killing shook the heavens. It was completely different from Guangzhou City and Nanchang City. The 5-star army chose to storm the city and kill their way in. Huguang City was also known as the Hubei Administrative Bureau, Jiangxia City, Wuchang City, Wuhan City. It had Wuchang City, Hanyang City, Huangzhou City, Qingtian City, Dun City, Jingzhou City, Xiangyang City, Yunyang City, etc. Lu Jianli, the administrative bureau of the left, gathered all the soldiers and civilians of Hubei City and Jiangxia City. There were a total of 100,000 soldiers. Then they welcomed the 150,000 reinforcements sent by the imperial court. With Mu Tsong as the leader, they decided to defend Jiangxia City to the death. Chapter 1691. The eldest son of the former king of Shiping was chased into the mountains by the 5-star army. He survived by eating rats and ants and escaped to Yingtian Prefecture. Because he had experience fighting against the 5-star army and was the eldest son of the former king of Shiping, there was no problem with his loyalty. He was sent by Zhu Xian to guard Jiangxia. Mu Tsong didn't look happy at all as he held the 150,000 new imperial soldiers. He knew how powerful the 5-star army was, so he discussed with Sir Lu Jianli to defend the city to the death. Mu Tsong said that they didn't have as many soldiers as the Nanchang Prefecture and Guangzhou Prefecture. They were also new soldiers. If they went out to fight, it would be suicide. It was better to use all of their strength to defend the city. They could hold on for a while longer and even turn the tide. Lu Jianli agreed with the suggestion to defend the city to the death. Xianxia Prefecture immediately started to strengthen the city. All kinds of defensive weapons were also prepared. However, it was useless. When the 5-star army arrived at the city, 100mm caliber field cannons were set up. All of the preparations were in vain. New Army Commander Su He Leng Feng 4th Division Commander Ling Daqiang, and Meng 2nd Division Commander He discussed and decided to attack Xianxia City. This is the first time the motorcycles are on the battlefield. It's a good opportunity to train the troops. Commander Ling Daqiang seemed to be very proud of this method and laughed. Su He and He didn't need to be mentioned. They both liked to be straightforward. Attacking by force was exactly what they wanted. The field cannons were set up and then the shells were fired. In just half an hour, a hole over 100 meters wide was blasted open on the city walls of Xianxia Prefecture. Then the cavalry and motorcycles poured in through the hole. This was especially true for the 3-wheeled motorcycle. There was a heavy machine gun mounted on it and the soldier in the back was holding a light machine gun. With their cooperation, any Southern Ming recruit that entered their sight became a moving target. Bursts of gunshots rang out, and the Southern Ming soldiers fell to the ground one after another. Needless to say, the cavalry relied on the momentum of their horses and brandished their sabers. One by one, heads fell to the ground and bodies fell to the ground. When the motorcycles and cavalry charged into the city and dealt a heavy blow to the new Southern Ming army, Mu Tsong showed his brave side. He personally led the newly formed inspection team and commanded batch after batch of South Ming New Army to launch a suicidal charge against the 5-star army. When corpses littered the ground and blood flowed like a river, it finally incited a mutiny among the recruits. They turned their spearhead and charged at Mu Tsong and his inspection team. It was a pity that the eldest son of the king of Shiping did not die in the hands of the 5-star army. Instead, he died in the chaos after being slashed countless times. Mu Tsong died in battle and Lu Jianli surrendered. Hubei was settled in one battle and they captured more than 230,000 recruits. One was a smart move, the other was a forceful attack, but the results were both good. When Yang Qindong received the telegrams from Tianhu and Su He, he was naturally pleased. When he issued the commendation, he ordered them to continue to work hard and continue to attack the Southern Ming Empire. He wanted the Southern Ming Empire to be unable to mobilize their troops in time to occupy more territory before the Southern Ming Empire reacted. At the same time, Yang Qindong ordered Yu Mian to take over the territories in Jiangxi and Hubei. At the same time, he arranged for the accompanying officials to take up their posts. Since those places were already Yangxia's territory, they had to be properly protected. As for what to do, the officials who came along were all experienced and knew what to do. After arranging all these, Yang Qindong looked at the Guangzhou prefecture in front of him and felt that it was a bit of an eyesore. Before he could think of a solution, the 3rd Army's commander Wu Sheng and 2nd Army's commander Xiao Feng came to him and requested to attack the city. Obviously, they were stimulated by the victory of their brothers. Yang Qindong was naturally gratified by the general's overflowing fighting spirit. He also felt that it was about time. They had already surrounded and bombarded the city for 5 days. It was time to give them a result. From tomorrow onwards, increase the intensity of the bombardment. Also, get the Air Force to distribute leaflets. Tell them that they only have 1 day. If they don't surrender, they will burn the Guangzhou prefecture. The next morning, the weather was fine. After the first round of bombardment, several hot air balloons appeared in the sky above the Guangzhou prefecture. Following that, countless leaflets of various colors fell from the sky and scattered around the city. After the first round of bombardment, there were many more injured people in the Guangzhou prefecture. Compared to the previous 2 days, the bombardment was even more ferocious. The Southern Ming soldiers and civilians in the city clearly understood what it meant to be in an abyss of suffering. Guan Ying hid in a basement dug by a tyrant in the city with a solemn expression. The bombardment outside was so intense that he didn't dare to stay outside any longer. Other than leaving a few soldiers on the city wall to observe the movements of the 5-star army, he usually stayed here. Guan Ying had thought of countless outcomes. He even thought of the 5-star army attacking the city. If the city was breached, he would die on the battlefield. However, he didn't think that the 5-star army would besiege the city and use cannons to deal with him. Now that the 450,000 soldiers were trapped in the city and couldn't leave, they didn't have an opponent to fight against. This feeling made him feel helpless. Dang dang dang. Someone knocked on the door. Before Guan Ying could invite him in, the Guangdong Provincial Secretary Zhou Xian walked in with a leaflet in his hand. He was sweating profusely. General Guan, look at this. It's all over the city. The situation isn't good. Guan Ying reached out to take the leaflet. After reading the first few lines, Guan Ying flew into a rage. This is impossible. The Nanchang Prefecture and Xianxia Prefecture have a total of 550,000 soldiers. How could they be breached in such a short time? This must be a rumor spread by the 5-star army to attack our morale. Zhou Xian didn't answer this question. He didn't know how to answer it. Logically speaking, this was impossible. However, after seeing the power of the 5-star army's cannons, he had to admit that the 5-star army could do what the Southern Ming army couldn't. Just like the Guangzhou prefecture under his feet. Was it because the 5-star army couldn't take it down? Of course not. They just wanted to capture him. However, looking at the contents of the leaflet, if they didn't surrender, the cannons would be even fiercer. They might even set the city on fire. It was obvious that the 5-star army was angry. They would rather give up the Guangzhou prefecture to deal with them. If they really wanted to burn the city, they wouldn't have anywhere to hide. Zhou Xian hurriedly came to find Guan Ying, hoping to discuss a solution. After reading the leaflet seriously, Guan Ying turned around and asked Zhou Xian, Sir Yang, do you think that Nanchang and Xianxia prefectures have really been breached? What does it matter if they are breached or not? The important thing is that we don't have time. The 5-star army had already made the final announcement through the leaflet. Either we rush out and fight the 5-star army or we abandon the city and escape. Otherwise we can just stay in the city and wait to be burned to death. Zhou Xian reminded Guan Ying. At this moment, Guan Ying didn't care about whether Nanchang and Xianxia prefectures had been breached or not by the 5-star army. Zhou Xian was right. The difficulty in front of them was the most important. Didn't the 5-star army say that they will take in the wounded? Send our wounded out of the city and we will break out. I believe that the emperor won't blame us. If there is a crime, I will bear it. Guan Ying finally thought it through. He wanted to send the wounded out and reduce the burden on the army before breaking out. He had a feeling that the 5-star army was playing the trick of surrounding 3 and missing 1. However, he didn't have a choice now, right? Once the hundreds of thousands of soldiers rushed out of the city, there would be many who would escape. This could be considered as leaving some seeds for the Southern Ming army. After finally making a decision, Zhou Xian let out a sigh of relief after hearing Guan Ying's decision. He was afraid that Guan Ying would still be indifferent. If that was the case, then the problem would be serious. He was afraid that the wounded soldiers wouldn't be comforted and a mutiny might occur. If that was the case, then there was no need for the 5-star army to make a move. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers would kill themselves. Zhou Xian let out a sigh of relief and seemed to be afraid that Guan Ying would go back on his words. He hurriedly said, Okay, I will arrange for the wounded soldiers to be sent out of the city. I hope that the 5-star army will keep their promise and treat them. Zhou Xian's shout could be heard from the top of the Guangzhou city's city wall. He expressed that he was willing to hand over the wounded soldiers to the 5-star army and hoped that they would be treated well. Soon after, the western city gate opened and some southern Ming soldiers carried or supported the 20,000 wounded soldiers out of the city. Then the soldiers in charge of escorting the wounded soldiers hurriedly returned to the city and closed the city gate from the inside. The 5-star army continued to watch and didn't take the opportunity to attack. It wasn't until the gates of the Guangzhou city were closed that some soldiers rushed forward and brought the wounded soldiers back. The medical personnel who had been waiting for a few days also came forward and began to classify the wounded soldiers and treat them. They're quite cooperative. Commander Wuxia chuckled. Yang Qindong's expression didn't change. Everything was within his expectations because he knew that the enemy was going to break out. It seems that we don't need to burn down the Guangzhou city. Sixth young master, do you mean that they are going to break out? Wu Xing was worthy of his position as a commander and quickly thought of something. On the other side, Commander Xiaofeng also understood Yang Qindong's meaning and added, the reason why they sent the wounded soldiers out is because they don't want to be implicated when they break out. That's right, you are all right. All right, Commander Wu, you have things to do. Go and inform Commander Ahuli and prepare to make a move. If I'm not wrong, they will break out tonight. Yang Qindong nodded calmly. The battle of the Guangzhou city should be over soon. Just as Yang Qindong expected, after the wounded soldiers were sent away, Guan Ying made preparations to break out. Chapter 1692. He called Zhou Xian, Li Hani and the others over to discuss how to break out of the encirclement. In the end, Li Hani would be the vanguard, leading 50,000 soldiers to clear the way. Zhou Xian and the other civil officials would be protected in the middle, and Guan Ying would lead the main army to follow. If the five-star army caught up, he would lead the army to meet them. He would risk his life to buy enough time for everyone to break out of the encirclement. Zhou Xian and Li Hani disagreed when they heard that Guan Ying wanted to bring the army to bring up the rear. Alright, it's settled. With Bugnam of Gojoseon's personality, he won't give up until he catches me. Since I can't escape no matter what, I might as well stay behind. I only hope that if you see the emperor, you must tell him that I, Guan Ying, didn't defect and fought until the last moment. Since Guan Ying had already said so, what else could they say? They could only nod and agree. Next they started to cook and let the soldiers eat their fill. No one knew how long they would run and where they would have their next meal. The cannons in the city continued to fire. This was Yang Qindong's idea. He didn't want Guan Ying to think too much when the cannons stopped firing. As long as the other party left the turtle shell that was the Guangzhou government, he wouldn't have the final say in what happened next. After another afternoon of cannons, the southern Ming army lost another 1,000 soldiers and 2,000 more injured soldiers. Guan Ying kept all the injured soldiers and told them that the five-star army wouldn't make things difficult for them. Then everyone sat down and waited for the sky to turn dark. In order to prevent the five-star army from discovering their plan, Guan Ying didn't order to burn the accumulated rations in the city. What he wanted to do was to leave the city without anyone knowing. As long as they could catch the five-star army off guard, even if they wanted to chase after them, they wouldn't be able to do anything to them. It was also impossible to catch all of them. Amidst their anticipation, the sky finally turned dark. After another round of cannons bombarding, outside the city, the sound of the five-star army's metal horns could be heard. They urged them to surrender and also asked them to send the injured soldiers out. They promised that they would treat them well. Alright, now is the time. The army will leave the city. Guan Ying immediately made a decision. He was already clear about the five-star army's pattern of cannons. Usually, the sound would continue for an hour before another round of cannons were fired. He wanted to use this time to let more people rush out of the city. The east gate opened from the inside was creaking in the night. Then countless black shadows rushed out of the city and headed straight towards the southern Ming's heartland. 300 paces away from them, the army were the army and were the five-star armies too. Seeing that the enemy had indeed begun to break through the encirclement, the squad leader in the middle said, "Immediately report the situation here. Sheep is out of the encirclement." Yes, in front of the powerful five-star army, the South Ming army was just a bunch of sheep. Even if Guan Ying's army was made up of veterans, they did not put them in their eyes. Their weapons were not as good as theirs, their morale was not as good as theirs, their protection was not as good as theirs, and their treatment was not as good as theirs. At this time the soldiers did not have a strong will. They did not even know who they were fighting for. In their muddle-headedness, they only thought about how to survive on the battlefield. It would be too difficult to rely on such an army to win the war. The mighty army walked out of the Guang province prefecture in the dark. In order not to be discovered, they did not even light up their torches. As a result, there were sounds of people falling or spraining their ankles on the road. Even Li Hani's vanguard army was like this. This army was a veteran army based on the Guang High Guards. They could be called veterans, but they had only been in the army for a long time and did not have much actual combat experience. The five-star army was to blame for this. Because of their strength, they had wiped out all the nearby forces. Now the South Ming army had nothing to worry about. They did not even have a ship, so it was impossible for them to participate in actual combat. Therefore, even though they had been in the army for many years, it was still the first time for many of them to be on the battlefield. When they saw how cruel the war was and how many of their comrades were killed in the artillery fire before they even saw the appearance of the five-star corps, they finally understood how powerful the opponent they were facing this time was. They also knew that this battle was much more difficult than they had imagined. However, they were already on the battlefield, so there was no point in thinking about it. What they needed to do now was to leave the Guang province prefecture and reach a safe place. As for what to do next, many of them had their own thoughts, which was to escape. There were even many people who had such thoughts. As the Guang High Guards who lived near the coastal area, they knew more than ordinary South Ming people. From time to time, they would see Xianxia's merchant ships and warships floating in front of them, which indicated their economic prosperity and military strength. There was also the policy of Xianxia towards the Han people, which made them understand that if they could join Xianxia, their life and work would be much better than in the South Ming dynasty. The pride in their hearts was dissipating bit by bit, and it was replaced by envy. However, because they were the registered soldiers of the Guang High Guards, they did not dare to do anything. If they really defected to Xianxia, it would only bring disaster to their families and loved ones. However, it was different in the war. They could face casualties at any time, so if there was a chance they would secretly leave. This way the South Ming dynasty would not immediately deal with their families. While the other party was investigating, they could find a way to bring their families to Xianxia's territory. Everyone had a selfish side, but some people showed it more obviously. Now, for the safety and a better life for themselves and their families, many soldiers had already made a decision in their hearts. As their commander, Li Hani was naturally able to sense all of this. However, he pretended not to see it and did not think too much about it. Thinking about it, if even ordinary soldiers could see it, how could he, as the commander, not understand it? It was just that he was indebted to the emperor and could not do something like surrendering without a fight. He could not do it, but he could give his brothers a way out. What the eye does not see, the heart does not grieve over. With such a mentality, he led the Guang High Guards as the main force of the South Ming dynasty's army as the vanguard and walked at the front of the group. Their speed of progress was quite good. When it was almost dawn, they had already rushed 15 kilometers and left Guangzhou behind. Li Hani believed that he was safe. He did not see any soldiers from the 5-star army for the entire night, so he believed that escaping would not be a problem. Now he was worried that General Guan Ying, who was in charge of covering the rear, would not be able to escape. After all, with so many soldiers leaving Guangzhou, there was no reason why the 5-star army would not be able to detect them. In fact, their every move was under the surveillance of the 5-star army. The reason why they did not make a move was because they were waiting for the South Ming dynasty's army to leave the city. Otherwise, once they attacked, what would they do if they scared the enemy back into the city? Since this battle had lasted the longest, it was only natural that they hoped to reap the most rewards. If they still had to attack the city in the end, they might as well choose to attack the city like how the new army and the Cold Vanguard Division dealt with the Xianxia prefecture. Although the losses would be greater and the gains would be less, victory would be in their hands. Waiting was often the most torturous thing. Seeing that the sky was about to brighten and the vanguard of the South Ming dynasty's army was about to run out of the encirclement, news finally came from the radio. The last batch of South Ming dynasty's army had also walked out of Guangzhou and was about 2 kilometers away from the city. In the current Guangzhou prefecture, other than injured soldiers and some old people who could not walk, there were no decent soldiers left. Yang Qindong also immediately saw the telegram sent by Wang Shan and immediately said, "Order the entire army to attack. Follow the plan and encircle the South Ming dynasty's army. Those who surrender will live, those who resist will die." The 18-kilometer encirclement was only guarded by the 50,000 soldiers of the Third Army and the 50,000 soldiers of the Russian First Division. It was clearly a bit empty. Luckily, the Cold Vanguard Division was mobilized in time. With their powerful firepower, they were able to fill the gap in the encirclement. Every 30 meters, there was a machine gun set up on both sides of the road to block the escape route of the South Ming dynasty's army. It was a bit risky, but when he thought of the fighting spirit of the South Ming dynasty's army and the machine gun, Yang Qindong felt relieved. However, in order to ensure that there would not be any problems, he looked at Crown Prince Yang Bo and said, "Bo, do you want to go to the battlefield?" "Yes." Almost without any hesitation, Yang Bo excitedly and quickly replied. As he spoke, he even put his feet together like a soldier who received an order to stand at attention. He. Yang Qindong was very satisfied with Yang Bo's performance. "Good, since that is the case, I will give you a chance. You can take the 4,000 black cavalry soldiers to the battlefield. But remember, you are only responsible for the periphery. Wherever there is a gap, block it. There is no need for you on the main battlefield. Also, these are all Han people. If you can avoid killing them, don't kill them. Although it was only a peripheral mission, Yang Bo was still very excited. He originally thought that he was only here to feel the atmosphere on the battlefield. He did not expect that he would have a chance to personally go to the battlefield. How could Yang Bo not agree? He immediately saluted and replied, "I promise to complete the mission." Yang Bo left. Along with him were Beta Persei Black Cavalry 1st Brigade Captain Qiu Vi, 2nd Brigade Captain Dao Xiao, Vice Brigade Captain Ping Yu and the others. Only Ba Daojiang and the 1,000 Black Cavalry soldiers stayed by Yang Chendong's side. Chapter 1693. From this, it could be seen that Yang Chendong admired Ba Daojiang a lot. Once Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao retired due to age, this person would become the true leader of the Black Cavalry. Right after the Black Cavalry Dragon Guard set off with Crown Prince Chang Yang Bo, the 3rd Army of the Lungfeng Army and the 2nd Division of the Lungfeng Army also launched an attack on the official road to the east of the Guangzhou Prefecture. They tightened the encirclement and launched an encirclement to annihilate the 400,000-strong Southern Ming Army. Guan Ying was in charge of bringing up the rear. When he led the 50,000 soldiers out of the Guangzhou Prefecture, the sound of horse hooves and gunshots could be heard from all directions. At this time, the sky was already bright and one could vaguely see that the front of the army was already in chaos. There was also the sound of horse hooves covering the sky. Not good, we've fallen into a trap. Guan Ying was indeed Kuang Ye's student and immediately thought of a possibility. The first order he gave was for the army to turn back and return to the Guangzhou Prefecture. At least they could rely on the city walls to resist. Even if they retreated back into the city, they could still fight in the streets. It was not like the outside of the city where everything was flat. What could they defend? Guan Ying gave the order very quickly. However, someone was even faster than them. The 4th Regiment commander of the 2nd Division of the Lungfeng Corps, Ling Lianquan, was in charge of bringing up the rear. After the Southern Ming Army left the city, he brought a whole battalion of Lungfeng soldiers to the front of the Guangzhou Prefecture's east gate and quickly set up a defensive line. Countless prepared sandbags were piled up together to form a temporary defensive line. Before the defensive line was fully set up, the Southern Ming Army that had just left charged back. Regiment Commander Ling Lianquan, who could already see the people approaching, took out a loudspeaker and shouted, "This road is blocked. The Guangzhou Prefecture is now under the control of the 5-Star Army. Anyone who dares to come within 100 meters of the front will be treated as a dangerous person and will be killed on the spot. Lay down your weapons and that is your only way out. The 5-Star Army can guarantee your safety and dignity." Ling Lianquan was not the only one shouting. Every platoon had a soldier shouting the same slogan to ensure that every Southern Ming soldier could hear them clearly. The shouts did enter the ears of the Southern Ming soldiers. But at this moment no one cared so much. They only knew that the 5-Star Army only had a few hundred people. This was a great opportunity for them to attack. If they did not seize this opportunity, they would not be able to return to the Guangzhou Prefecture, which would be the real danger. Countless soldiers from the Southern Ming dynasty rushed over. They wanted to rely on their advantage in numbers to completely defeat the 5-Star Army. However, just as they ignored the advice and entered about 100 steps away from the formation, gunshots rang out. In view of the large number of soldiers from the Southern Ming Army, there were at least 5,000 soldiers in the vanguard. Commander Ling Lianquan did not dare to be careless. When he gave the order to counterattack, he used heavy firepower. Light and heavy machine guns and rocket launchers rained down on the Southern Ming Army, causing flames to erupt. Countless Southern Ming soldiers fell to the ground, covered in blood. This was a battle that should not be taken seriously. It couldn't even be called a battle. It would be more accurate to call it a massacre. The moment the gunshots rang out, the 5,000 soldiers from the Southern Ming dynasty were destined to die. A group of soldiers holding large swords and spears rushed towards a group of soldiers with modern weapons. It was like a suicide attack against the 8-nation alliance in the late Qing dynasty. Figures fell to the ground one after another and their lives were quickly drained away. After nearly a quarter of an hour, the barrels of many of the cold vanguard warriors had turned red. The ground was littered with bullet casings. Finally, there were no more enemies in front of them. The world suddenly became quiet. There were more than 5,000 lives, but in just a short 15 minutes, not a single one had survived. This kind of lethality was something that the southern Ming soldiers had never seen before. Even Guan Ying, who was leading the troops, couldn't help but widen his eyes and shut his mouth when he saw this scene, even though he was already mentally prepared. He knew that it was over. Everything was over. The five-star army had such a powerful firepower advantage. It was not something that the southern Ming dynasty could contend against. Not to mention that their military strength was only 3 times that of the enemy. Even if it was 10 times, 100 times, or 1,000 times, they still could not see any hope of victory. Guan Ying finally understood why the five-star army was able to conquer such a large territory in just a few decades. They were able to conquer a situation that the Han people did not even dare to think about. If the southern Ming dynasty had such powerful firearms, they should also be able to do it. Guan Ying could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. The five-star army was ultimately the Han people's army. They would not be as ruthless as they were against other races. Didn't they just shout for them to surrender so that they could keep their lives and dignity? It would not be too difficult for the surrendered soldiers to keep their lives. However, it would not be easy for them to keep their dignity. Since the five-star army made such a promise, it meant that they still treated the southern Ming dynasty as a part of the Han people. Thus, surrendering was not unacceptable. Just as Guan Ying was thinking about this, a captain ran in front of him and asked carefully, "General, should we continue to charge?" Guan Ying could see from the eyes of this chiliarch that he was afraid. However, he did not have any intention of mocking him. If it was him, wouldn't he also be afraid? It was just that he was not afraid of death. He was only afraid of unnecessary casualties. What's the point of continuing to fight? We can't win. Just follow their words and surrender. Also, go to the front and tell the army to surrender. Guan Ying finally made the best decision in his life. That was to surrender to the five-star army and save everyone's lives. As for how the history books would write about him, he would just let it be. Guan Ying surrendered. This result was beyond the expectations of many people. Even Yang Chendong, who was at the rear, was slightly surprised when he received the news. In his opinion, Guan Ying should be an extremely strong die-hard person who would rather die in battle than surrender. However, no one would have thought that after a series of gunshots and a one-sided massacre, they would actually convince him. It seemed that sometimes one had to be decisive. Although this seemed a little cruel, it was often possible to use the smallest price to obtain the greatest victory. Just as Guan Ying announced his surrender, the 18-kilometer battle line was already in chaos. The sudden appearance of the five-star army's cold vanguard soldiers and cavalry caught the southern Ming dynasty's army off guard. They first carried out a meaningless resistance without any suspense. After throwing down some corpses, the morale of the army collapsed. They did not choose to fight force with force. Instead, they began to run in all directions. At this time, the five-star army soldiers who were already in position played a role. They used guns and heavy machinery to block most of the escape routes of the southern Ming dynasty's army, forcing most of the southern Ming dynasty's army back to the battlefield. However, there were also a small number of people who escaped from the gap in the encirclement. But then they were divided into squads and surrounded by the seemingly omnipresent black cavalry and became one of the captives. Yang Bo and Beta Persei led a group of 8 Longwei soldiers. They also successfully surrounded a group of hundreds of southern Ming dynasty soldiers. In order to escape faster, they had already thrown away all their weapons and became unarmed deserters. How could they be a match for the elite black cavalry dragon guards? It was also Yang Bo's first time participating in a real battle. Although he was only responsible for the periphery and faced some defeated soldiers who had lost their fighting spirit, he was still very excited. Wearing a set of specially tailored black battle armor, he single-handedly stopped 7 southern Ming soldiers who were trying to escape. Yang Bo did not know that this was the result of Beta Persei deliberately going easy on him. His every move was in the sight of Beta Persei. Once there was danger, he would rush to his side to protect him. In the worst-case scenario, he would become a huge human shield. Whether he knew it or not, whether it was intentional or not, Yang Bo had indeed been trained. He also showed maturity and steadiness beyond his age from the first battle. After that, when Beta Persei reported to Yang Chendong, he was not stingy with his praise. This also proved that Yang Chendong's way of training his successor was correct. Yang Bo's growth also made Yang Chendong very pleased. There was nothing happier than having a successor. The Guangzhou prefecture was breached. This battle lasted for a full 6 days. Nearly 10,000 enemies were killed, more than 30,000 were injured and more than 400,000 were captured alive. As soon as the news reached Nanjing Yingtian prefecture, the precious porcelain in front of Zhou Xian was smashed clean. Just a few days ago he received a letter from Guanyin asking for help and was thinking about whether to send reinforcements. Then came the news that Xianxia and Nanchang prefectures were breached, Jiangxi and Huguang were occupied by the 5-star army, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers were captured. On the day he received the letter, Zhou Xian smashed a lot of things. But at that time he still had hope in his heart, and that was Guanyin. Unlike Nanchang prefecture and Jiangxia prefecture, they were all new soldiers. In contrast, Guanyin brought some veterans. Although they had not seen blood, they had been trained for so long, so they should have some strength. Just as he was thinking about whether there would be good news from the Guangzhou prefecture that could at least inflict a heavy blow on the 5-star army and let everyone know that Xianxia was not invincible, the Guangzhou prefecture fell. Guanyin surrendered along with more than 400,000 soldiers. In this way, including the local army, there were less than 1 million soldiers a few days ago. Now there were only 700,000 soldiers in his hands, including the soldiers of the capital defense camp. Could they still resist the advance of Xiaxia's army? Chapter 1694. Peace Talks. After Zhou Xian calmed down, this thought flashed through his mind. Since there was no way he could win in a fight, it was better to negotiate while he still had some strength. It was better than the other party killing his way to Jingdou to negotiate. At this time, Zhou Xian was still dreaming of being the emperor. In his opinion, losing a few provinces was nothing. After his efforts, didn't he already lose half of the great Ming dynasty? Although it was called Baiming, he had long regarded it as a different race. Now he was only losing half of his territory, so why not? As long as he was still the emperor, he would be able to make a comeback, wouldn't he? As long as there was hope, he would fight for it. Mao Mu and Zhou Xian met Zhou Xian under such circumstances. Because Minister Xie Chongshu had once met with Yang Chendong alone in Crimson City, and as for what they talked about, no one knew. He had long since lost Zhou Xian's trust. Right now he was locked up in the prison of the Brocade Guard's Brocade Guard. Now Zhou Xian was in charge of the Ministry of Rights. However, his loyalty was still to be determined, so he did not take the position of minister. In front of the two of them, Zhou Xian tentatively expressed his thoughts. In the end he said, I am considering the safety of the people and don't want them to suffer the pain of war, so I made this decision. And if Bugnam of Gojosian must come to the capital, I will fight to the death with him. Obviously Zhou Xian still cared about his face. At the end he still hardened himself and expressed that he was an unyielding person. In fact, in history Zhou Xian still had some ability. Even when he was captured by the leader of the Wara, he was very decent and unyielding. Of course, that was only recorded in the history books. As for whether or not it was written under the instructions of Zhou Xian, who later became the emperor, no one knew. Hearing this, Zhou Xian carefully raised his head. Reporting to the emperor, this official's qualifications are low. Should I ask Minister Xie to come out and preside over such a big matter? Whether or not there is a problem with Xie Chong is still being investigated. He absolutely cannot be released. What's wrong, Minister Zhou? Are you not confident in your own abilities? Or are you saying that you don't want to share the burden of the great Ming dynasty? Seeing that Zhou Xian was about to get angry, how could Zhou Xian dare to say no? He immediately kowtowed and said, This subject is willing to share the worries of your majesty and the great Ming dynasty. Tomorrow I will lead a team to Bugnam of Gojosian for peace talks. Zhou Xian knew that it was difficult, but he was even more clear that if he did not agree now, he was afraid that his head would fall to the ground immediately. This attitude made Zhou Xian's expression much better. After that he no longer looked at Zhou Xian. Instead he looked at Mao Mu and said, Minister Mao, the embroidered uniform guard must arrange for people to protect this matter. Furthermore, the front lines had suffered consecutive defeats. Perhaps the people's hearts were now unstable and some people might take this opportunity to threaten the great Ming dynasty. We, the embroidered uniform guards, must take action. We won't allow any villains to stir up trouble. Also arrest Guan Ying's family members. Throw them in jail, put them on trial and behead them after autumn. This subject obeys, Mao Mu said without any change in expression. Then he glanced at Zhou Xian, who was kneeling on the ground and trembling with fear. He knew that it was impossible to negotiate now. This was just Zhu Qian's wishful thinking. As Yang Qindong's spy in the Southern Ming Empire, he needed to do more things to show his ability and extraordinariness when he saw that the matter was about to be completed. After Zhu Qian waved his hand, Mao Mu and Zhou Xian left Qinzheng Hall. Then Mao Mu left the palace and went straight to the embroidered uniform guard's yamen. He thought that it was time to have a good talk with Xin Nantang and the others. The current embroidered uniform guard was in Mao Mu's hands. It was just like when Chao Jixiang controlled the embroidered uniform guard. However, the difference was that he no longer had any external enemies. Not only did the emperor and empress trust him, but even the entire group of eunuchs did not dare to oppose him. His current power was comparable to Wang Zhen's in the past. When the embroidered uniform guard learned that Mao Mu had come, Xin Nantang, Wu Ben and Luo Zhu also came to the secret room. "Greetings, master." After the three of them entered, they noticed that there were two unfamiliar men standing behind Mao Mu. Based on their experience, they felt that these two people must be skilled martial artists. They couldn't help but feel a little nervous. They carefully recalled what they had done recently. It seemed that there was no situation where they disobeyed orders. Only then did their complexions become much better. "You're all here. Hand over your sabers." Mao Mu's gaze swept over Xin Nantang and the others before he opened his mouth to speak. When they heard that they had to hand over their sabers, they saw the two fierce warriors standing behind Mao Mu. Wu Ben's instinctive reaction was to not hand it over. This was clearly to deal with him. Although he had been very obedient and had not done anything to let Mao Mu down, he still wanted to resist. Xin Nantang and Luo Zhu did not say anything. Even their expressions did not change. They happily took off the spring-embroidered sabers from their waists and handed them over to the two strong men who walked over. They were originally scapegoats. If it wasn't for Mao Mu, they would probably have died in prison. Even their lives were given by him. What else was there to be afraid of? As long as it was Mao Mu's words, they would obey. This was because in their eyes, Mao Mu was their savior and their talent scout. Wu Ben only hesitated for a moment before he saw Xin Nantang and Luo Zhu obediently hand over their sabers. Only then did he come to his senses and hurriedly take off his saber. However, this moment of hesitation had already fallen into Mao Mu's eyes. Previously, he was still worried about who to appoint as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. Now he had made a decision. "The three of you, how have I treated you?" Mao Mu decided to get straight to the point. In front of his subordinates there was no need to hide things. Wouldn't that make him seem ungenerous? "Master, your kindness to us is as heavy as a mountain. You are like a second parent to us. If you have any orders, even if it is a mountain of swords or a sea of flames, we will not frown." This time the three of them spoke in unison. "Good, I am very gratified. Let me ask you. Now that the Southern Ming dynasty has been defeated, the five-star army is bearing down on us. What do the three of you think?" Mao Mu picked up a cup of tea from the table and slowly drank it. This turn of events was a bit big. For a moment Xin Nantang and the others didn't immediately speak. Instead they thought to themselves, what did Mao Mu mean by this? Could it be that the army had been defeated and he wanted to transfer them to the army? If there was such a possibility, wasn't the Imperial Horse Directorate in charge of this matter? And the head eunuch there was Mao Mu's subordinate, Zhang Chen. Wouldn't it be a simple matter to arrange for them to be transferred to the army? If it was before, it would be a good thing to be able to temper themselves in the army. After all, the embroidered uniform guard's reputation wasn't too good. If they could be transferred to the army, they might actually have a chance to stand in the imperial court and become an important official. This was something that the shameful embroidered uniform guard officials couldn't do. But now it was clear that the army wasn't enough. Entering there was no difference between sending them to their deaths. Those who had the ability were all thinking of how to jump out of the army. Who would take the initiative to enter? Thinking of this, the three people's faces turned ugly. They knew that if Mao Mu really had such intentions, they would have to go regardless of whether they were willing or not. "Well, why aren't you replying? Say whatever you want to say in front of me. I'll forgive you." Mao Mu saw that a while had passed and the three people still didn't speak, so he pretended to be unhappy. With Mao Mu's reminder, the three people didn't dare to remain silent. Xin Nantang was the first to speak. The 5-star army is full of vigor. They are all elites who have been through hundreds of battles. In comparison, our southern Ming army is all new recruits. If we fight on the battlefield, I'm afraid that we will lose more than we will win. Yes. Mao Mu nodded. Although Xin Nantang's words were tactful, Mao Mu could tell that he didn't think highly of the southern Ming army. On the contrary, he thought that the 5-star army would win. This answer made him very satisfied. This was a person he could rope in. I agree with Xin Tongji's opinion. The southern Ming army is probably not a match for the 5-star army. Luo Zhu immediately expressed his opinion. Mao Mu didn't respond this time. Instead, his gaze fell on Wu Ben. At this moment, Wu Ben's mood was somewhat conflicted. After all, he was now a member of the southern Ming Imperial Guard. Logically speaking, he shouldn't speak on this kind of matter. Even if he spoke, he shouldn't say anything discouraging. However, Mao Mu had to ask. Moreover, Xin Nantang and Luo Zhu both responded. He knew that he had to say something. Yes. Reporting to Factory Master, this lowly one thinks that it will be very difficult for the southern Ming army to win this battle. Wu Ben finally spoke. Although it was a bit forced, he also expressed that he didn't think highly of the southern Ming army. This made Mao Mu feel relieved. He finally made a decision. Good. The three of you listen to my orders. Xin Nantang will be promoted to commander of the Imperial Guard, a primary 3rd rank official. Luo Zhu will be promoted to commander Tongji, secondary 3rd rank official. As for Wu Ben, you can go to the army and temporarily be the deputy commander of the Capital Guard, also a primary 3rd rank official. This subordinate thanks Factory Master. Xin Nantang and Luo Zhu were both in high spirits. The two of them finally got what they wanted. Their official positions were also promoted. At this moment, their hearts were filled with excitement and excitement. On the other hand, although Wu Ben's official position was promoted, he was kicked out of the Imperial Guard. As for going to the Capital Guard, who didn't know that the commander there was the Emperor's trusted aide? He was also the general of the Imperial Guard, Fan Zhong. If he went to be a deputy commander, how could he have any power? He hated himself for not performing well just now. However, it was useless to say anything now. An arm couldn't twist a leg. Moreover, Mao Mu had saved his life. He couldn't betray him. Therefore, although he was unhappy, he still replied, "This subordinate thanks Factory Master." Good. Commander Xin and Luo Zhu can go first. Deputy Commander Wu can stay behind. Mao Mu said with a smile. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.